fatal love from the past. Kindness has the power not only to save the world, but also to destroy the one who brings it to others. The natural desire to help everyone, to protect, to guard, to save, and to prevent harm often leads to tragedy. It is important to recognize which people should not be helped, and even more so, to avoid covering for them in the hope that they will realize their mistake and change. The story of Cecilia Hadad is a vivid example of how believing in the best and the desire to protect someone once dear can first poison and then take a life. She feared harming her former lover in any way, but he had no fear in dealing with her and fleeing to the other side of the world, hoping justice wouldn't reach him there. An unidentified body in the river. On an early spring morning, Sunday, April 29, 2018, a man fishing on Lane Cove River, a northern tributary of the Parramatta River in Sydney, Australia, came upon a horrific scene. Floating downstream, face down, was something resembling a human body. The elderly fisherman couldn't believe his eyes at first and even thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, all doubts vanished. It was the body of a young woman with long dark hair. The man immediately reported the incident to the police, and soon, a few dozen feet downstream, the lifeless body of a young woman showing signs of violent death was pulled from the river. She had no identification or mobile phone on her, so investigators were tasked with identifying the deceased and determining the circumstances of the tragedy. The version that the incident was an accident was dismissed during the initial examination of the remains. The body was still fresh, having spent less than a day in the water. Clear strangulation marks were visible on her neck, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that the victim had fought desperately when she was attacked. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and wide pants with many large pockets, which were stuffed with stones. It was obvious that the criminal had hoped the body, weighed down by the extra load, would sink and not be discovered anytime soon. However, some of the stones likely fell out since the pockets had no fasteners, allowing the body to simply float downstream. A toxicology report revealed no traces of alcohol, prohibited substances, or strong drugs in the victim's system. There were also no signs of intimate violence on the body. As initially suspected, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The victim appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, so the police immediately checked reports of missing women within this age range. By the afternoon, they had identified the deceased after relatives reported the disappearance of 38-year-old Cecilia Hadad, who had suddenly stopped responding on April 28th and missed an important work meeting. A glance at Cecilia's photo convinced detectives that it was her body that had been pulled from the river, and relatives arriving for identification confirmed the fact. But who could have so cruelly dealt with a young woman and successful entrepreneur known for her active charity work? However, the name of the main suspect was almost immediately identified, but by that time, he was already on another continent. Who was Cecilia Hadad? Cecilia Bruna Haddad was born in the fall of 1979 in the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She grew up in a close-knit, middle-class family where her parents did everything they could to provide their many children with a good education and all the necessities. From a young age, Cecilia was very smart, responsible, and goal-oriented. She became one of the best students in her school and dreamed of continuing her education at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Additionally, Cecilia had a kind heart. She couldn't ignore someone else's misfortune and always tried to help within her abilities. Those around her described her as a compassionate, caring, and generous young woman, always ready to lend a hand. After finishing school, Haddad became a student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, one of Brazil's leading private universities. There, she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. After receiving her diploma, Cecilia successfully passed an interview at a major mining company, where she was eagerly hired. Almost immediately, her career took off, and within a year, she became a leading specialist. In 2007, at the age of 27, the Brazilian woman decided to dramatically change her life and moved to Australia after receiving an enticing job offer. Cecilia fully understood the challenges she would face being in a foreign country, far from her loved ones and friends, but she decided to take the risk. Cecilia was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her native languages, but had to learn English almost from scratch, a task she handled successfully and quickly. Haddad took a managerial position at one of Australia's largest mining companies and quickly fit in with the team. The sweet, sociable, and friendly woman made many friends and began actively engaging in charity work and volunteering, helping people and homeless animals. Alongside this, she developed a new hobby, hiking and skiing in the mountains. In 2016, Cecilia founded her own consulting company, which supported and guided people looking to start their own businesses. Her clients included both native Australians and immigrants who had come to the country in search of a better life, just as she had once done. Personal life. Working at the aforementioned major Australian industrial company, Cecilia earned a good salary and could afford whatever she wanted. When she started her own business, she was able to bring her younger brother and sister from Brazil, helping them find jobs and supporting them financially at first. Overall, things were going well for Cecilia. She traveled, earned a second higher education, and lived life to the fullest. However, in terms of her personal life, Haddad was far less fortunate. Back in her student days, in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro, she entered into a romantic relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man 7 years her senior and her complete opposite. The young man was lazy, unambitious, and didn't aspire to much. But Cecilia loved him, always trying to help and motivate him toward success. In the end, when Cecilia received a job offer from Australia, Mario refused to go with her, fearing the challenges they would face in a new country. However, the young woman wasn't about to give up on her dream, one she had worked so hard for, and after prolonged but fruitless persuasion, she left alone. In the mid-2000s, while working in Sydney, Cecilia began an office romance with one of her colleagues. This relationship led to marriage, but the union was short-lived, lasting less than 3 years. The couple didn't have children, and they parted ways amicably, without hard feelings or resentment. They even maintained a friendly relationship afterward. A blast from the past. In 2016, shortly after her divorce, Cecilia decided to fly home to visit her parents and old friends. By that time, she had already left her job and was successfully growing her own business. She looked fantastic, enthusiastically talked about her life in Australia, and eagerly made plans for the future. On the third day of her stay, Haddad unexpectedly ran into Mario, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years since she emigrated to Australia. The man was shocked by the success his former girlfriend had achieved, while he himself was barely making ends meet. This chance encounter turned out to be fateful for Cecilia, who suddenly realized that she still had tender feelings for her ex-boyfriend. For the next few days, the two spent time walking around their favorite places where they had once been happy. After Cecilia returned to Sydney, they continued to talk and text every day. Within a month, Cecilia bought Mario a plane ticket and essentially brought him to live with her, deciding he was the man she would be happy with for the rest of her life. The couple settled in Cecilia's spacious apartment in an elite residential complex, and for a time, she fully supported her beloved. Later, using her connections, she helped him secure a good position with a high salary and actively encouraged his career growth. Haddad was once again in love, just like in her youth, and failed to notice that her partner was simply taking advantage of the situation. Toxic relationship. Shortly after the couple moved in together, Their relationship began to deteriorate. The man became jealous, domineering, and tried to control every aspect of Cecilia's life. However, independent and strong-willed, Cecilia refused to be manipulated. On top of that, Mario started meddling in her business, wanting a share since he didn't like working for someone else. The couple frequently argued, but Haddad always tried to resolve conflicts, seeking compromises and making every effort to save the relationship. Yet, her partner was simply draining her emotionally, monitoring her actions, taking her phone and work laptop without permission, and trying to limit her social circle. Cecilia endured this situation for almost a year, but finally decided to have an honest conversation and informed Mario of her intention to break up. This news infuriated him. He started yelling and insulting Cecilia, and when she tried to calm him down, he struck her across the face. He had been physically aggressive before, pushing her or grabbing her arms hard enough to leave bruises. But this was the first time he had hit her. This was the last straw, and Haddad simply showed him the door. At first, Santoro tried to beg for her forgiveness. He sent her touching messages, apologized, and sent flowers and gifts. But Cecilia remained firm. Realizing he couldn't fix things, the man changed tactics, resorting to threats and intimidation. From that point on, he began stalking his ex-girlfriend, turning her life into a nightmare. Obsessed stalker. After the breakup, Mario rented an apartment in a complex just 10 minutes away from Cecilia's home. He called her daily, sent dozens of messages, and constantly tried to meet her, waiting at her front door. Cecilia still tried to reason with him, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, and believed that her ex would calm down. In January 2018, late in the evening, Santoro showed up at Haddad's apartment again. At first, she didn't want to let him in, but he was persistent and forced his way inside. He attacked the petite woman, but she miraculously managed to escape and barricade herself in another room. While the stalker tried to break down the door, she pleaded with him to stop, think, and leave. Eventually, Cecilia threatened to call the police, and only then did Mario calm down and leave her home. Cecilia didn't report the incident to law enforcement, nor did she mention that Mario had been stalking her for months and threatening her. She knew that his visa had expired, and that if he came to the authorities' attention, he would be deported back to Brazil immediately. Cecilia pitied the man she once loved, knowing that back home he would return to his worthless life. Despite this, Haddad understood that staying in her apartment was no longer safe, so she temporarily moved in with her sister Carol and then spent about a month living with a close friend named Rita. Both women urged Cecilia to file a police report, sensing that this situation could end in tragedy, but she was still afraid of harming her tormentor. She hoped that he would realize the error of his ways, calm down, and leave her alone. Most importantly, she didn't believe that her ex-boyfriend was capable of causing her any serious physical harm. When Cecilia returned to her apartment in early April 2018, she realized that Mario had been there several times in her absence. She was horrified to discover that he had a spare set of keys, which he had initially returned after the breakup, but took back when he forced his way in during the night. Neighbors also confirmed that they had seen Santoro near the complex multiple times, and even going up to the floor where Haddad's apartment was located. When they reasonably suggested she go to the police, Cecilia again refused, assuring them she would handle the situation herself. She planned to change the locks, but decided to live incognito for the time being, not drawing attention to herself, to see if her stalker would leave her alone. For over 2 weeks, Cecilia acted as though she wasn't home. She didn't turn on the lights, tried to stay quiet, and only came and went when she was sure Mario wasn't around. At the slightest suspicion, she would spend the night at her sister's or a friend's. The stress almost caused her to have a breakdown, but then, suddenly, everything changed in an instant. Strange goodbye. On April 25, 2018, Mario unexpectedly called Cecilia and, in a calm voice, said that he had realized everything and would no longer bother her. He also apologized and informed her that he had bought tickets for a flight to Rio de Janeiro. He planned to leave early in the morning on April 28th and asked if she would meet him one last time to say goodbye. Haddad agreed, but said she would meet him directly at the airport, where they could see each other and talk. After this call, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her stalker and tormentor had decided to leave on his own, and she believed he would no longer disturb her. Overjoyed, she called her sister and told her everything. But Carol was not as thrilled and suspected something was off. She begged Cecilia not to meet with Mario, but Cecilia dismissed her concerns, assuring her that everything would be fine and that nothing could happen to her at the airport. Cecilia was excited at the thought that her nightmare was finally ending and that she could start a new life. Sadly, that miracle did not happen. Mysterious disappearance. On Saturday, April 28th, Cecilia was supposed to arrive at Sydney International Airport by 7 a.m. to see her ex-boyfriend off and say a final goodbye. Afterward, she had an important work meeting scheduled and another in the afternoon. The night before, Cecilia had one last call with her sister, telling her about her plans. Carol again tried to dissuade her from meeting her ex, but Cecilia was adamant. She insisted that she needed to see for herself that Mario boarded the plane and would no longer bother her. The two sisters talked for about an hour, and Cecilia promised to call as soon as he left. However, the next day, instead of a call, a rather strange message arrived from Haddad. She said she was heading to the mountains for a couple of days because she needed to reflect on everything that had happened and clear her head. Carol tried to call her, but the phone was already turned off. Soon, it became clear that similar messages had been sent to several of Cecilia's friends and colleagues, and she had not shown up for any of her scheduled meetings, which was completely out of character for her. That evening, Cecilia's family and friends reported her missing to the police, providing the name and details of the potential suspect. At that time, they still hoped she was alive, but by the next morning, all hope was shattered when her sister was called to identify her body. Investigation and evidence search. On April 29th, the police combed the riverbank upstream, searching for clues or evidence. They found a discarded pair of men's shoes soaked through in the grass. Detectives speculated that the criminal didn't want to leave tracks and decided to dispose of the shoes. In the victim's apartment, dried footprints left by wet socks were found. But why did he return to the victim's apartment after dealing with her? Since Mario didn't own a car, he used the vehicle of the woman he had deprived of life to dispose of her body. Sand, fragments of coastal vegetation, and puddles of river water were found inside the car. Additionally, numerous fingerprints belonging to the suspect were discovered. Moreover, almost all of Santoro's movements were tracked through his cell phone signal, and he was caught on several street surveillance cameras. It was determined that Mario took a taxi to the airport. Authorities quickly located the driver, who agreed to speak with them. The driver claimed the passenger was calm, but asked for a significant detour to pass over a small bridge crossing a river away from the bustling city roads. There, he asked to stop, got out, and threw a bag into the water, as well as something resembling a set of keys. He then returned to the car and they continued the journey. The driver took the police to that very bridge. Divers were called to the scene and spent hours searching the riverbed for evidence. Fortunately, the current in that spot was weak, so they soon found the mysterious bag, followed by the set of keys. Inside the bag were the victim's cell phone, work laptop, some documents, a wallet, and personal items. It was clear the suspect was trying to create the illusion that the woman had left town, so people would believe she had indeed gone to the mountains. He also disposed of all duplicate keys to make it harder to access the apartment. By the time Cecilia's body was pulled from the river, the perpetrator had already landed in Rio de Janeiro, convinced that he would never be caught and would escape punishment. Retrieving a criminal on another continent is indeed a challenge, but with no doubt left about his involvement in the crime, Interpol was called in. The manhunt expanded internationally, drawing significant media attention. Search and arrest of the suspect. Only after Australian police gathered and presented irrefutable evidence linking the Brazilian citizen to the brutal crime was Mario officially declared wanted in his home country. He was finally apprehended on July 7, 2018, at a friend's apartment, where he had been staying the entire time. Santoro didn't resist arrest, but immediately requested a lawyer. During the initial interrogations, he denied his guilt, but soon, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he began confessing. However, even as he admitted to the crime, he desperately tried to blame the victim. Mario claimed that it wasn't him, but his former girlfriend, who had been stalking him after their breakup and wouldn't let him live in peace. He said he decided to leave the country just to escape her, but Cecilia allegedly stole his passport to prevent him from leaving. That morning, according to him, he went to her apartment to retrieve his document without which he couldn't board the plane, but she refused to return it. A struggle ensued, and he accidentally ended her life. The accused claimed he tried to resuscitate Haddad, performing CPR and chest compressions. However, when he realized she was gone, he panicked and attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of her body and the evidence. His best idea, he said, was to dump everything in the river. Reconstructing the timeline of events. Reconstructing the timeline of that tragic day was a painstaking process since Mario constantly changed his testimony and tried to confuse the investigation to minimize his guilt. He played on sympathy, even attempting to cry, but no one believed his version of events. The victim's family, friends, and colleagues all testified against Santoro as they had witnessed how he had made Cecilia's life a nightmare. According to the investigation, by the time Mario purchased his plane tickets, he had already decided to take the life of his former girlfriend and was meticulously planning the details. On Saturday, April 28th, around 5:30 a.m., he arrived at Cecilia's building and rang the intercom. Cecilia wasn't expecting him and thought they would meet at the airport. Feeling uneasy, she didn't want to let him in. A few minutes later, the man opened the door using a spare key he had and climbed the stairs to Cecilia's apartment. It's likely she let him in because otherwise the neighbors would have heard some noise, but they reported hearing nothing unusual. Mario immediately attacked Cecilia, strangling her and not giving her a chance to scream or call for help. She fought back desperately, as evidenced by the bruises and hematomas on her arms, but she was overpowered. After ending her life, he wrapped the body in a blanket, took the keys to her car, and quietly made his way to the parking lot while all the residents were still asleep. He drove to a secluded spot by the river, filled her pants pockets with rocks, and submerged her body in the water, hoping it wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. During this process, the suspect soaked his shoes and decided to discard them to avoid leaving any traces, as he planned to return to her apartment. Around 7 a.m., Mario returned to Cecilia's building using her car. He went back up to her apartment and quickly gathered some of her belongings, including documents and her laptop, to simulate her departure. He also sent text messages from her phone to family members and several friends, pretending she had suddenly gone on a trip to the mountains. He later put the phone in the same bag, which he threw from the bridge into the river. After completing this, Mario walked back to his own apartment where his suitcase was already packed. He showered, changed his clothes, and soaked the ones he had been wearing in bleach to destroy any potential evidence, then called a taxi to the airport. On the way, he asked the driver to make a detour to dispose of Cecilia's belongings, and within an hour, he calmly boarded a plane, convinced he would never be held accountable for his actions. The trial and verdict. Since the accused was a Brazilian citizen, he could not be extradited to another continent to stand trial for the crime he committed. However, The countries managed to reach an agreement and resolve legal differences to ensure the trial would be as fair as possible, although the suspect would serve his sentence in his home country. The bureaucratic hurdles and investigation process took some time, and the trial didn't begin until June 2023. Delegates from Australia, who had been directly involved in the investigation, traveled to Rio de Janeiro to participate in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant tried to evoke pity from the judges, crying and claiming to feel remorse, insisting he didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. On July 1, 2023, Mario Santoro was found guilty of premeditated crime, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The convicted man and his lawyers repeatedly tried to appeal the sentence, but the court upheld its decision. A lot of people enjoy traveling solo without worrying that something bad could happen. The main perks are the total freedom to do whatever you want, the ability to quickly adjust plans, and the rare chance to spend time alone with your own thoughts and feelings. However, alongside these benefits, there are also plenty of risks, especially for women who decide to take solo trips. The tragic story of Maria Louisa Sedeno, which happened in 2020 in Costa Rica, shocked the entire country and later made headlines internationally. The case drew widespread attention because it occurred at an expensive hotel in a popular resort area, and the victim was a well-known doctor who headed the anesthesiology department at one of the country's largest medical centers. Who was Maria Louisa Sedeno? Maria Louisa Sedeno was born on May 29, 1977, in La Fortuna, San Carlos, in the province of Alajuela, Costa Rica. She was the youngest of 5 children in a modest family. Her relatives were all simple workers with no education beyond what they got in school. From a young age, Maria Louisa was ambitious and very determined. She wanted to help others and dreamed of becoming a doctor, promising herself she'd be the first in her family to get a college degree. In school, her favorite subjects were chemistry and biology, and after graduating in 1994, she was accepted into the medical school at the most prestigious university in the country, located in San Jose. As a student, Maria Louisa moved to the capital and stayed there for the rest of her life, though she kept close ties with her family, regularly visiting and staying in touch with them. In 2000, after completing her degree, she started working as an anesthesiologist at one of the largest medical centers in the capital. She quickly advanced in her career, constantly learning and improving her skills. By 2015, Sedeno had become the head of the anesthesiology and recovery therapy department. She was loved and respected by her colleagues and became quite a prominent doctor, though she achieved all this by sacrificing her personal life. For a long time, Maria Louisa was alone and completely devoted to her work. In 2017, when she was 40, she started a romantic relationship with a doctor from the same hospital, although he worked in a different department. She believed he was the love of her life, someone she could build a strong and happy family with. However, at the beginning of 2020, the couple broke up because he started seeing a younger colleague. For Maria Louisa, the breakup was a devastating blow. She fell into a deep depression and buried herself in work for months, barely noticing anything around her. Her only comfort was her little dog, Mofalti, who she treated like her child. The last vacation. In July 2020, Maria Louisa decided she desperately needed a break and a change of scenery before she lost her mind. At the time, the COVID-19 pandemic was spreading worldwide, and various restrictions were in place to slow the virus. She chose to head to the coast and stay at a small but cozy hotel called Le Mansion Inn, located in the scenic Punta Arenas. This resort is usually popular with tourists from all over the world. But with the pandemic and strict lockdowns, it was almost deserted. At the hotel where she checked in, only a few rooms were occupied. However, the peace and quiet were exactly what she was looking for. Maria Louisa planned to spend the weekend there and head home on Monday. She brought along her beloved dog, Mofalti. She stayed in a ground-floor room that had a second door leading to a private courtyard. These rooms were designed for travelers with pets so that the animals could go outside and take care of their business in a designated area. All the other rooms with courtyard access were empty at the time. On July 18th, Maria Louisa checked in, dropped off her things, and headed to the beach. The next day passed just as quietly. She strolled along the shore, sunbathed, had dinner at the restaurant, and then went back to her room. She called her mother, and they talked for about half an hour. Maria Louisa mentioned how empty the hotel was, with only a few staff members, most of whom were juggling multiple jobs. She planned to check out the next morning after breakfast, but she never made it that far. A lifeless body wrapped in a sheet. On the morning of July 20th, Maria Louisa didn't show up for breakfast. The hotel staff noticed this because there were so few guests, but they didn't think much of it, assuming she was just sleeping in before heading home. But when checkout time came and she still hadn't appeared, they decided to check her room. 2 staff members knocked on Maria Louisa's door, but there was no answer. They could hear her dog barking inside, so they knew she had to be there. They kept knocking and calling her name, but the only response was the barking. So they went around to the courtyard to see if they could reach her that way. The second door was unlocked, and the staff decided to enter to make sure everything was okay. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed brownish stains on the floor that looked like dried blood, and on the bed, they found a body wrapped in a sheet. The hotel staff immediately called emergency services and informed the management. Unfortunately, the paramedics could only confirm that Maria Louisa was dead. She had been killed several hours before her body was found. Everything about the scene was strange, from the condition of the room to the circumstances of her death. The investigation begins. Maria Louisa's body showed multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks left by different people. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought back fiercely. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxia and a broken neck. Someone had strangled her so hard that they broke her cervical vertebrae. The autopsy also revealed that she had been sexually assaulted before she died. Next to her bed, there was a bottle of mineral water, an open bottle of expensive wine, and 2 glasses. According to the maid, Maria Louisa had indeed ordered these items the night before, but she had been alone. The records of her keycard showed that after receiving her delivery, she didn't leave the room, and no one entered. However, the glass door to the courtyard didn't require a key, so the attacker could have gotten in that way. The hotel had plenty of security cameras, which might have shed some light on what happened. But it turned out none of them had been working for months. The administration claimed that due to the pandemic and the drop in guests, they had cut costs by shutting off the cameras. Forensic experts tested the bite marks on Maria Louisa's body for DNA, hoping to find the killer's saliva, but the results were shocking. The saliva found in the wounds was her own. Because the bite marks were on her face, neck, and chest, where she could not physically reach, investigators concluded that the perpetrator intentionally stained the wounds with her saliva to cover his tracks. Another surprising detail came from the pathologist, who reported that her body had been thoroughly washed after death. This meant that after she was attacked, tortured, and strangled, the perpetrator or perpetrators took her body to the bathroom, washed her, then laid her on the bed, stained the bite marks with her saliva, and wrapped her in a sheet. Since the hotel's cameras weren't working and the place was almost empty due to the pandemic, no witnesses were found. None of the guests or staff reported seeing or hearing anything unusual, and no strangers were spotted on the property. The first suspect. News of the brutal murder of a well-known anesthesiologist quickly spread across the country, causing a huge public outcry. The police needed to solve the case as soon as possible and figure out who could have been so cruel to an innocent woman. When the victim's family was asked if she could have had a brief vacation fling, they were sure the answer was no. She was still heartbroken over her recent breakup and hoping for reconciliation. As for the 2 glasses found in the room, Maria Louisa's sister explained that she always used 2, one for wine and one for water. The forensic results confirmed this, as only the victim's fingerprints and lip marks were found on the glasses. During the interview with the police, Maria Louisa's mother suddenly recalled that during her last phone call with her daughter, Maria had mentioned a man who worked at the hotel. She said they had chatted during lunch, and he asked her why she was traveling alone and how long she planned to stay. This gave detectives their first suspect to question. That employee was 38-year-old Teodor Herrera Martinez, the son of a longtime friend of the hotel owner, Harry Bowden. In fact, thanks to his father's connections, Martinez had gotten the job at the hotel. He worked as a bartender and did personal errands for his boss. Right from the start of the interview, Martinez acted strange, very nervous, and claimed he didn't remember Maria Louisa or ever talking to her. Fresh scratches were clearly visible on his cheeks and neck, and he couldn't give a clear explanation of where they came from. When he was asked to remove his shirt, similar scratches were found on his chest and shoulders. Detectives suspected the victim had left those marks while fighting for her life, but they needed to wait for experts to confirm. Martinez was arrested, initially for 6 months, while the investigation continued. The second suspect. Forensics confirmed that blood and skin particles from Martinez were found under the victim's nails, but the bite marks on her body didn't match his dental impressions. The police continued to question hotel guests and staff until a 36-year-old man named Luis Carlos Miranda came into focus. He wasn't a regular guest and didn't work at La Mansion Inn, but he was a friend of the hotel owner, which allowed him to stay there for free. One of the bite marks on the victim's body could have been made by Luis, but it wasn't clear enough to be certain. Still, the police arrested him as a second suspect for 6 months, just like Martinez. Miranda, too, denied ever seeing Maria Louisa or having any contact with her. The third suspect. About a week and a half after the shocking murder, a third suspect was arrested, Harry Bowden himself, the 69-year-old hotel owner. It's worth noting that Bowden, a businessman of Dutch origin, had extensive connections with politicians and entrepreneurs and owned several properties in different countries. What led to his arrest was that one of the bite marks on the victim's body matched Bowden's dental impressions. It also came to light that around 6 months before the murder, Bowden had undergone surgery at the hospital where Sedeno worked. Despite Bowden insisting that he had never seen the woman before, police believed he might have noticed her during that time, taken her contact information, and lured her to his hotel. Initially, due to his age and health issues, Bowden was placed under house arrest. However, when he suddenly changed his residence without notifying the police, he was taken into custody, as there were fears he might try to leave the country. There was a fourth person involved in the case, Bowden's young husband, a man named Yader Daniel Abanda. However, no evidence was found against him. Abanda denied involvement in the crime, claiming that his partner was not feeling well that night and did not leave their room. The investigation's theory. Once the autopsy and forensic results were in, investigators concluded that there were 3 attackers. There were no signs of ropes or restraints used to immobilize the victim, but all of her limbs showed bruises from fingers and palms, indicating she was held down by hand. In Maria Louisa's mouth, experts found fabric fibers and a thread, which suggested she had been gagged. This likely explained why none of the other guests or staff heard any screams, even though the victim's injuries and signs of torture showed she must have desperately called for help. In Maria's phone, found in her room, there were messages to her sister, where she praised the hotel, saying how beautiful, cozy, and quiet it was. She mentioned how attentive and helpful the staff was, and she even noted that she had spent the evening chatting and dancing at the bar with a man who served coffee and looked after the property. Based on the description, this was Martinez. From the beginning, Martinez was the prime suspect. He was the only one of the three suspects with visible scratches. His skin and blood were found under the victim's fingernails, and his biological material was found in her body despite attempts to wash it off. However, casts of his teeth did not match the bite marks on her skin. Since Maria Louisa hadn't left her room after returning that evening and hadn't let anyone in, investigators believed that the attackers entered her room through the door leading to the courtyard. She might have left it unlocked so her dog could go out, and since the neighboring rooms were empty, no one would have noticed. The attackers likely moved quickly. Once inside, they knocked Maria unconscious with a blow to the head, gagged her, and then tortured and assaulted her for several hours. When they were done, they strangled her so violently with their bare hands that they broke her neck. Afterward, they washed her body in the bathroom, placed it on the bed, and wrapped it in a sheet, contaminating the bite marks with her own saliva. The trial. All three suspects denied any involvement in the crime, each claiming they were asleep in their rooms that night. But there were no witnesses to confirm their alibis except for the hotel owner's husband, whose testimony was questionable from the start. However, strange text messages were found on the suspects' phones. In them, they shared disturbing intimate fantasies, and the day before the crime, they talked about a guest who was alone. The public trial didn't begin until September 2022, more than 2 years after the murder. 71-year-old Harry Bowden appeared in court in a wheelchair, as his knee problems had worsened, making it difficult for him to walk. Right away, the prosecution faced challenges in proving the involvement of Bowden and Miranda. The evidence against them was mostly circumstantial. Text messages on their phones and dental impressions, which the defense argued should be dismissed because the bite marks weren't a perfect match with their dental records. The expert who was supposed to testify about the bite marks on the victim had been hired by Bowden's lawyer. This orthodontist flew in from Madrid and claimed that the marks found on the victim's skin weren't strong enough evidence and couldn't definitively link the suspects to the crime. The day after his testimony, the expert returned to Spain, but the prosecution questioned his credibility. A follow-up investigation revealed that this individual wasn't properly accredited and was only a so-called expert by name. His testimony was thrown out, but the prosecution still struggled to prove the connection between the two main suspects and the bite marks. The prosecution argued that a crime this brutal and calculated couldn't have been committed by just one person. They believed at least 3 people were involved in the assault and murder. The defense, however, challenged this, pointing out that one strong man could have carried out the crime alone. The verdict. The only undeniable evidence was against Teodor Herrera Martinez. In addition to his semen being found inside the victim and his skin particles under her nails, investigators also found Maria Luisa's blood on both the outside and inside of his shoes, with the shoe prints matching those found at the threshold of her room and near the bed. As a result, Martinez was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. Given that he was 40 years old at the time of sentencing, this was effectively a life sentence. Martinez admitted that he had been intimate with the victim that night, but claimed it was consensual and insisted that someone else must have killed her after he left. Since there was no solid evidence against Bowden and Miranda, aside from the bite marks and text messages, Their involvement couldn't be proven. Both men were acquitted and released in March 2023. However, in September of that same year, an appeals court reviewed a complaint filed by the victim's family and ordered the case to be reopened. By that time, though, both Bowden and Miranda had long since left Costa Rica. They fled the country as soon as they were released from court. Currently, they are living in the Netherlands, and even if the new trial finds them guilty, they won't face any punishment. This is because there is no extradition agreement between the Netherlands and Costa Rica, despite the severity of the crime. According to statistics, the number of crimes committed by juveniles has been increasing worldwide in recent years. There has been an upsurge in violence among school children, usually directed at their peers, and the victims are often hospitalized, disabled, or even killed after such incidents. Such hostile acts usually have one goal: to prove their own superiority, power, and permissiveness. Plus, the laws of many countries are lenient to juvenile offenders, which gives them faith in their impunity. The story of a French girl named Anes Maran, who died at the hands of a high school student, shook the whole country. They studied in a prestigious college with an impeccable reputation in which it seemed nothing like this could not happen. However, as it soon turned out, the perpetrator had attacked the girls before, but his wealthy parents managed not only to keep the case quiet, but also to arrange a son in a good school in another city, hiding the truth about his adventures. It is said that teenage aggression is a form of protest during the period of personality formation and search for oneself. But in our story today, this boy's cruelty was the result of a complete lack of empathy, the ability to empathize and sympathize with others. He was extremely dangerous to society and incorrigible, and therefore became the second teenager in French history to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Who was Anes Maran? Anes Maran was born in 1999, November 26th in Paris, and was the only child of the couple Paula and Frédéric Maran. The girl grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Parents adored their child and sought to give her all the best. Agnès, from an early age, did not know anything to refuse. She was dressed in brand-name stores, taken to the sea, bought expensive toys and gadgets. Maran was an active, sociable, and restless child. She always had a lot of friends and hobbies. She showed creativity, loved music and movies, and in the future dreamed of becoming a film director. At school, she studied well, and teachers noted her high abilities, but often to achieve the best results, she was prevented by banal laziness and inattentiveness. At the age of 13, Agnès got involved with a bad company, which negatively affected the girl's studies and behavior. She started smoking, and not only regular cigarettes, drinking alcoholic beverages and skipping school. Her parents were not in favor of harsh measures of upbringing and several times tried to simply talk to their daughter, but the conversations did not lead to anything. The girl promised to correct herself and to stop communicating with bad company, but she lied. When she was once again caught smoking and drinking beer right on the territory of the educational institution, the question of her expulsion arose. Her parents realized that if their daughter stayed in Paris, she would continue to socialize with people who had a bad influence on her, and nothing would change. Therefore, Frédéric and Paula decided to transfer Agnès not just to another educational institution, but to send her to another city or even a province, away from the capital's bustle and temptations. A new school. After reviewing several options, Maran's parents opted for a closed private college, Savignol, located in the commune of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, which is in the department of Upper Loire region of Auvergne. It is a prestigious educational institution with almost a century of history. The college was founded in the 30s and worked on the principle of boarding school, where children not only studied, but also lived. However, by the end of the 2000s, the college faced serious financial difficulties and was actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. In a small community, with a population of only 2,500 people, young people increasingly sought to go to study in the capital or a major city, and therefore the local educational institution experienced a shortage of students and, as a consequence, a shortage of finances. Previously, to get into this college required a high grade point average as well as good characteristics. But even this did not guarantee admission because the competition was several people for one place. However, in 2011, the situation changed dramatically. Due to a large shortage of students, the school, in order not to go completely bankrupt, significantly reduced the requirements for admission, especially if they were children of wealthy parents who were willing to act as sponsors. Despite her behavioral problems, Anes had a good academic record and grade point average, which allowed her to get into Savinol College, and the authorities simply turned a blind eye to her characteristic. Agnes' parents were happy. They believed that the change would be good for their daughter. She would become more responsible and more easily overcome such a difficult transitional age. Maran was a very sociable, cheerful, and friendly girl. She was able to fit into the new team from the first days. She felt comfortable and quickly made friends. In addition, she showed good progress in her studies, including in new disciplines, which were not available in her previous school in Paris. Her parents visited their daughter at the boarding school every 2 or 3 weeks. They were very pleased with her successes, as well as changes in behavior for the better. Agnes came home to visit only once during her studies. It should be noted that the new school was located on a vast territory surrounded by forest. There were no clear boundaries, fences, and strict security because the crime rate in these parts was considered one of the lowest in the country. To get from the college to the center of the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon required no more than a quarter of an hour on foot, so students after school often went there in groups. But before 5 o'clock in the evening, all had to return back. There were disciplinary penalties for breaking the rules. The disappearance of a student. On November 16, 2011, Agnes, together with some of her classmates, decided to take a walk into town after class. There, she met a friend of hers, who studied in another school, but they often crossed paths and constantly called each other. The two girls decided to go shopping and fell behind the general company. A couple hours later, the young people returned to campus, but Maran was not with them. At first, this circumstance did not cause much alarm, and everyone was sure that she would soon return. But the time passed, it began to get dark, and the absence of the student seriously worried the teachers. Her phone was switched off, and she could not be found on campus, so the school management did not hesitate to report the incident to the police. The search began that evening and was conducted by law enforcement officers, teachers, and students of the school. They were divided into groups, each of which combed a different area, but no trace of the missing girl could not be found. No one had seen her and had no idea where she might be, but everyone hoped that she would return alive and unharmed. Marian's parents were notified almost immediately and asked if their daughter had returned home. Frederick and Paola were shocked at the news and rushed to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon as fast as they could. They assured them that Agnes could not have run away, for she had no reason to do so and had nowhere to go. According to them, their daughter liked her new school very much. She had made many friends here. She did not feel any discomfort, and she had no conflicts with anyone. The father and mother of the missing Agnes became actively involved in the search. They talked to their daughter's friends, posted pictures of her all over the city asking for help in finding her, and tried to find any clues or leads. What is Agnes's friend hiding? The first thing the police did was to look for people who were the last people to see the missing Agnes and who might have known about her future plans. Girls from her class said that Maran met a friend of hers in the city and went shopping with her, but no one could give her name. However, soon the law enforcers managed to find Estelle, the same friend from another school. The girl was indeed the last person with whom Agnes had been in contact, so she was considered as a very valuable witness. However, she did not provide any useful information at the first interview. She said that Agnes had helped her choose a birthday present for her father. Then they had a milkshake each and said goodbye. Estelle headed for her home, and Agnes had to return to campus. The girl's story sounded plausible, but her behavior seemed a bit odd. She was visibly nervous and seemed to be holding something back. They decided to talk to her again, and suddenly the story she had told began to take on some details that she wanted to keep quiet. Estelle confessed that Agnes had planned to meet a young man that day. a man she had not told her the name of. Allegedly, it wasn't supposed to be a date, but the guys were going to do something bad, apparently taking illegal substances. A couple hours later, Estelle tried to call Agnès, but she didn't answer, and by evening her phone was turned off. The girl admitted that she lied at the first interrogation because Maran asked her not to tell anyone about the meeting with the mysterious guy, and she promised her that. However, when it became known about the disappearance of Agnès, Estelle decided to confess everything because she suspected that the sudden disappearance could be associated with this young man. It has been suggested that Agnès may have simply run away from college. The girl may have fallen in love and is now spending time with her secret boyfriend. Her phone was last online on campus the day she disappeared, but the device was turned off afterward and it was impossible to locate it. Nevertheless, police officers were able to quickly access all data regarding Agnès' calls and correspondence. It was then that the name of a 17-year-old Mathieu Moulinas, a high school student at the same school as the missing Marin, first came to the attention of the police. The first suspect. It turned out that the missing woman for the last few days corresponded with Mathieu Moulinas, but what could connect her with a 17-year-old young man, what interests they could have in common? In any case, the boy had to be questioned because he could have valuable information and shed light on the case. Nothing concrete or alarming in their correspondence could be found, but on the day of Agnès' disappearance, they were really going to meet on campus and walk together. Mathieu promised to show her something, but did not specify what it was. Moulin was first invited to talk to the police on November 17th. He behaved perfectly calm, but there were strange scratches on his face and hands that looked quite fresh. However, the young man admitted that he was dabbling in illegal substances, and yesterday he specifically overdid it, which caused him to lose consciousness and fell into a thorny bush where he lay for several hours. Classmates and educators confirmed that there were indeed problems with this student. Mathieu was admitted to Savenol College in January 2011. His parents transferred him here to supposedly protect him from bad company and problems. However, the young man even here used alcohol and various illegal substances, which raised the question of his expulsion. But he still felt sorry for him and was given time to improve. Moulinas looked like a typical rebel and troubled teenager. It was as if he challenged those around him with his appearance and behavior. He wore Gothic-style clothes, smoked and drank hot drinks right on the campus. He bragged about his antics to his peers, noting that he would not be punished for it. On the day of Agnès' disappearance, Mathieu disappeared for several hours. Toward evening, he came out of the woods in dirty clothes, with scratched face and hands, and to all questions he answered that he had had too much to drink and was passed out. Naturally, it all looked and sounded suspicious, but so far there was no hard evidence against him, and therefore the investigators decided to take a closer look at him. The spoiled son of rich parents. Mathieu Moulinas was born in December 1993 in the municipality of Neguet-Solorgues in Garda, and was the eldest of 3 children of the couple Sophia and Dominique Moulinas. He grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a fairly well-to-do family, and from childhood was used to having his every whim immediately fulfilled. From an early age, he was observed some strange things. The boy was quite aggressive, irascible, hard to find a common language with peers, and tried to stay apart from other children. In adolescence, the situation worsened. Mathieu had outbursts of rage, he often started fights, began to drink alcohol regularly, and experimented with all sorts of illegal substances. But at the same time, despite his aggression and antisocial behavior, the young man had a very attractive appearance, thanks to which he became popular with the opposite sex. At the time of the described events in his hometown, he had a girlfriend about whom his parents knew and whom he visited on weekends. Mathieu had a number of records with the police, including the theft of prescription drugs from a pharmacy, which he committed with a friend. But the case was hushed up, probably thanks to money from the teenager's parents. He was also able to get into a prestigious private school with a low-grade point average and problems with the law because his father offered to sponsor the school when it was in crisis. During interrogations, Moulinas behaved defiantly and arrogantly, but but remained completely calm so that the police even doubted his involvement in the disappearance of Agnese. The guy was constantly twirling a yo-yo in his hands, his favorite toy, with which he never parted. At the first interrogation, he claimed that he did not know Agnès, but when he was shown a printout of their correspondence, he began to change his testimony, trying to lie on the fly, but quickly became confused in his own words. According to the guy, he promised to show Agnès a clearing in the forest where mushrooms grow. Allegedly, they used them together, and after Mathieu became ill, and he fell into a thorny bush where he lay until the evening, and when he woke up, he saw that Maran was not. He didn't go looking for her, but just went back to the campus because it was getting dark. A lawyer hired by the parents of the Molinas was present at all the interrogations and recommended that his young ward show the place where he had last seen Agnès and where they, according to him, used mushrooms. However, Mathieu said that he would not be able to find that clearing because they stumbled on it by accident, and he got out of there on autopilot, not really understanding where he is and what is happening around. But Mathieu's words were soon refuted by experts who found no traces of mushroom ingestion in his blood. Moreover, the scratches on his body were recognized as a consequence of a struggle. That is, someone scratched him with nails, and apparently, it was a girl. A gruesome discovery in the thicket. The students of the school who had seen Mathieu coming out of the woods that evening pointed out the direction from which he had appeared, and it was in that part of the woods that it was decided to make a large-scale, thorough search. At that time, there was still a faint hope of finding Maran alive, but on November 18th, searchers awaited a terrible discovery. In a small clearing, hidden in a dense thicket, was found badly mutilated and partially charred body of the missing Agnès. Her clothes were torn, her underwear was missing. There were all the signs of violence, as well as traces of penetrating stab wounds. Doubt that this heinous crime committed by Molinas, no one had no doubt, but it was necessary to wait for the conclusion of forensic experts, as well as to obtain confessions from the killer himself. Actually, when Mathieu was told about the terrible discovery, he did not particularly repudiate and began to testify, telling how everything was. Confessions of a ruthless killer. The strangler confessed that he deliberately lured Agnès into the woods to abuse her, but allegedly did not plan to kill her. However, she put up fierce resistance, scratched him, so he had to tie up the victim using the rope from his favorite toy, yo-yo, which he carried with him everywhere. Agnès screamed and threatened to turn him into the police, which pissed the guy off. Going to prison he did not want to, and therefore decided to kill the unfortunate and get rid of the body. Mathieu brutally beat Agnès, breaking her arm, nose, several ribs, and shin, and then gave her 17 stab wounds, most of which came to the neck, face, and chest. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, he doused her with a flammable mixture from a canister and set her on fire, hoping that the fire would completely destroy the body. Then he quickly left, because it started to get dark, and he did not see that the fire was soon extinguished. He took his toy off the dead body and took it with him. The high school student told about the incident calmly and in detail, as if savoring every word and watching the reaction of the detectives. He felt no remorse or pity for the victim. The examination confirmed that under the fingernails of Agnès were particles of skin and epithelium Mathieu, and in her body revealed traces of biological fluid of the rapist. Also on the rope of the very toy yo-yo found sweat traces of both the perpetrator and the victim. After all the necessary studies and medical conclusions, Agnès' body was given to her parents, who buried their only daughter in Paris. It is noteworthy that the funeral took place on November 26, 2011, on her birthday. The first victim of a young psychopath. When law enforcers thoroughly took up the biography of Molinas, they were shocked by the fact that Maran was not his first victim, but this information was carefully tried to hide. As it turned out, he had been cruel to others since childhood, bullying animals, other children, and even his own sisters. He always took an incomparable pleasure in hurting others and watching them suffer. In August 2010, Mathieu attacked his young neighbor Julia, with whom he knew since childhood. The girl showed interest in the handsome neighbor, and he decided to take advantage of it. The guy lured her into the woods, where he hit her on the head, and while the victim was disoriented, tied her up with Scotch tape taken from the house, and then abused the unfortunate. Molinas then began to strangle her and probably would have killed her, but suddenly her cell phone rang. The perpetrator recoiled, looked around, and simply left the scene. A terrified Julia managed to free herself and called her parents, who immediately reported the incident to the police. Mathieu was arrested the same day. During interrogations, he cried, trying to appease the police, and also made attempts to shift all the blame on the victim, claiming that she herself provoked him, teasing and hinting at intimacy. But law enforcers understood that he had prepared for the crime in advance, and even took duct tape with him to immobilize the victim. Nevertheless, despite the gravity of the crime, Mathieu was not punished. The court took into account the very young age of the perpetrator, and instead of prison sent him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he spent only 4 months. All this time, psychologists and psychiatrists worked with him and evaluated his condition. In December 2010, the chief specialist, who was in charge of Molinas, gave a conclusion that he was fully rehabilitated, and after the course of therapy, he no longer posed any threat to others. The court, after reading this report, released the offender, requiring him only to attend several anger management sessions. Parental patronage. It is worth noting that the Molina couple also put a lot of effort into getting their son released. They promised the judge that Mathieu would leave the region and not cause any more trouble, and they also said that they would make sure that the heir would undergo therapy. They hired the best lawyers who did everything possible to keep their client out of jail. After that, the parents started looking for a new school for their son, but since he had a criminal record for such a serious article, they did not want to accept him anywhere. Then the father personally went to the provincial closed college Savinol and made an appointment with the director. He knew about the financial problems of the institution and immediately offered to sponsor him. When it came to the admission of Mathieu to the college, the director noted that the guy is too low academic performance, and the criminal case of a potential student could hit hard on the reputation of the school. But Dominic Molinas, in every possible way, vindicated his son, lying that there was no violence, just his ex-girlfriend so tried to get back at him after the breakup. Allegedly, that's why he was released a few months later, when everything was sorted out. Surprisingly, but the leadership of the educational institution did not go into the details of the trial and accepted the version told by Dominic. Apparently, the amount of sponsorship he had announced played a decisive role, and they simply turned a blind eye to the crime and withheld this information from other students and their parents. The trial and the verdict. Mathieu had taken Agnès' life only a month before he turned 18. However, he was a minor at the time of the violent and brutal crime, and therefore the law provided for a lighter sentence for such offenders, and the trial itself had to be held in private. Agnès' parents insisted on making the sessions open, at least partially, with the involvement of journalists who would cover the case in the media. However, the Maran couple were refused, and the trial was held behind closed doors. The proceedings began only on June 18, 2013. The public prosecutor harshly criticized the numerous omissions in the case of Mathieu, in particular, the fact that the psychiatrist who gave the conclusion that the guy is not a threat to others was a young girl who did not have the proper qualifications. She had no previous experience with criminals and made a fatal mistake. The defendant underwent a second psychiatric examination, and experts concluded that not only is he unrepentant, but he may well commit a similar crime again if given the opportunity. Mathieu himself confirmed this, stating that he enjoyed watching the victim suffer. Moulins was diagnosed with symptoms of schizoid and paranoid disorder, which together with outbursts of uncontrolled aggression made him extremely dangerous to others. However, he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible for them before the law. Moreover, the prosecutor insisted that the young man be tried as an adult due to the brutality of his crime, and his request was eventually granted. On June 28, 2013, Mathieu was found guilty of abuse and murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced psychotherapy. He became the second juvenile offender in French history to receive such a harsh punishment. Moulinas's lawyers decided to appeal the sentence, but on October 10, 2014, a jury of appeals upheld the life sentence, ending any possibility of a review of the decision. In 2016, Mathieu's parents wrote and published a book in which they described their bitter experience and admitted that their son remains unrepentant. The high-profile case of Denise Dragone is a vivid example of how youthful maximalism, morbid jealousy, and passion for illegal substances can lead to tragedy and destroy 3 young lives at once. The oldest participant, and I'm not afraid of this word, the main culprit of this story at the time of the tragedy was barely 22 years old, and the 2 girls whom he desperately tried to keep, playing with their feelings, were only 17 and 19 years old. Their love triangle didn't last long, leading to 2 pregnancies, manic stalking, and, eventually, cold-blooded murder. Mario Topanera was born in Spain in the suburbs of Madrid, a small town of Alcorcón, in 1996. The young man has never burdened himself with studying and finding a good job. In his 22 years, he lived in the house of his parents and interrupted by casual earnings. The main passion of the guy was graffiti. He drew perfectly, but he could not apply his talent as an artist anywhere, being satisfied with small part-time jobs, painting walls outside and inside buildings. Mario's main source of income was the sale of illegal substances. He did not do it himself, but found interested customers and brought them to a remote quarter of the city, where his acquaintance, who could get everything at the request of buyers. Topanera received a good percentage of each such transaction, so he was interested in finding such people. It is not known whether the parents knew what their son was doing, but if they did, they obviously turned a blind eye. It should be noted that Mario had a bright appearance and bold character. He enjoyed authority among friends and a lot of popularity among the opposite sex. The young man skillfully used his charm, easily made acquaintances, and often twirled romance with several girls at the same time, not intending to burden himself with serious relationships. Denise Maria Dragone was a native of Romania, where she was born in 2001 in the family of Emil and Daniela Dragone. The parents of the girl, at the time of her birth, were still very young and were in a difficult financial situation. Due to the circumstances, they were forced to go to work in Spain, leaving their little girl in the care of grandparents. A few years later, when the couple were able to legalize in a foreign country, get a good job, and more or less establish their everyday life, they took their little daughter to their home in sunny Spain. The girl quickly settled in and made friends in her new place. She found it easy to learn the language, and at school she got high marks in almost all subjects. In addition, the little girl took an interest in dancing, willingly spent several hours a day in the studio, and regularly participated in all kinds of competitions. When the girl was in middle school, the marriage of her parents gave a crack, and they decided to separate. After the divorce, the child was left to live with her mother, but her father, despite the fact that he had a new family, continued to take care of her, in all ways supported communication, helped financially, and in every way tried to take part in the life of his daughter. Soon her mother also remarried, and a year later the girl had a younger brother, whom she adored and spent a lot of time with him. At the age of 16, Denise decided that she wanted to master the art of hairdressing and become a stylist. She left her studies and dance classes, focusing entirely on her new hobby. Her parents did not discourage her or somehow prevent her, allowing her daughter to make her own choice. To gain experience, Denise got a job in a beauty salon, which belonged to her relatives. The third heroine of this dramatic story and the final link in the love triangle was a 19-year-old girl named Rocio Martinez. She was born and raised in the suburbs of Madrid. Her father was a policeman who was transferred to Alcorcón, where his whole family moved. Rocio from childhood was impulsive, scandalous, and sometimes even aggressive. She was used to always get what she wants and did not tolerate rejection. Even at an early age, the girl was diagnosed with diabetes and serious heart problems, because of which she had to take medication on a regular basis to monitor her regimen and diet. But her health problems didn't keep her from bad company and experimenting with illegal substances. She consumed alcohol, tried drugs, and repeatedly took part in petty thefts and robberies together with her friends. However, thanks to her police officer father and his connections, Martinez was never prosecuted for her actions. Rocio believed in her impunity and that no matter what she did, her father would get her out of trouble. In addition, Rocio was quite beautiful. She always had a lot of admirers and admirers. When Denise left school and started working as a stylist, she had more free time, which she devoted to socializing with friends. Since high school, she had a best friend named Sylvia to whom Denise confided all her secrets and worries. One day, on a spring evening in 2018, walking around the city with her friend, the young lady accidentally met Mario. A handsome and cheerful guy immediately managed to charm Denise. A conversation started between them, and in the evening of the same day they exchanged phone numbers. Soon the young people had an affair. They saw each other almost daily, and their relationship developed rapidly. For the first time in her life, Denise truly fell in love, and her chosen one seemed to be her ideal. It also turned out that they had many common interests. They liked the same movies, the same music. They both adored dogs and dreamed of traveling the world. Just a few days after meeting, Denise invited her chosen one to a family dinner to introduce him to her mother. But Daniela did not approve of her daughter's choice. The woman immediately did not like Denise's lover. Something in him alerted her and even frightened her. Mother hastily made inquiries about him and was horrified when she learned that Mario is associated with the trade in illegal drugs. Daniela had a serious talk with her daughter, hoping that she would end her relationship with a guy with such a dubious reputation. Denise calmed her mother and promised her that she would break up with her lover, but in fact she continued to meet with him. Quite quickly, Denise realized that Mario is not so nice and kind as he wants to seem. The young man tried to control every step of his passport, wanted to know where she goes and with whom she communicates. Without permission, took her phone and checked accounts and social networks. For several months, the girl in love hoped that her chosen one would change and they could build a strong and lasting relationship. But it only got worse. Mario began to consider her his property, which he can dispose of, and who must do everything only as he says. At the moment when Denise seriously considered breaking off the relationship, she was horrified to realize that she was pregnant. She didn't want to tie her life to this man and endure constant harassment. Besides, Denise was afraid that now Mario wouldn't leave her alone at all. On top of that, she was only 17 years old, and she herself was simply not ready for motherhood and responsibility for a new little life. Then Denise decided to talk frankly with her mother and told her everything, asking for advice on how to proceed. The woman listened to her daughter and recommended her to terminate the pregnancy, adding that the choice, in any case, will remain only for her. Denise thought it over once more and then followed her mother's advice by having an abortion. When Topanera found out about it, he was furious. The guy thought that Denise betrayed him, that she had no right to do so, and only he could decide what to do with this child. Relationships finally broke down, but the young man was not going to let Denise go and leave her alone. Moreover, he promised to take revenge on her for such betrayal and to hurt her as much as she hurt him. When Denise called her father in tears and told him about everything, Emile decided that his daughter needed to get away from all these difficult events that had shaken her peace of mind and go somewhere on vacation. He paid for his ex-wife and daughter a trip to one of the fashionable European resorts, where they went together. The vacation really did Denise good. She calmed down a little, relaxed, began to make plans for life again, and seemed to no longer think about Mario. But the vacation was over, and Denise returned home again. Mario did not long pine for his former passport, and almost immediately began an affair with 19-year-old Rocio Martinez. This fiery, aggressive, and conflicted girl was the complete opposite of the quiet and calm Denise. She could make a scandal in the same place, go into a fight, or throw a tantrum. Rocio also experimented with illegal substances and could easily break the law, knowing that she would not be punished for it. With Mario, they quickly got together and had fun together because the guy could get any illegal drug she asked for, wanting to test its effect on himself. However, Mario couldn't forget and let go of his ex-girlfriend. He still wanted to control her, to know where she was and what she was doing. Periodically, he wrote to her in social networks, called her, and even offered to resume the relationship. Denise, who had a very hard time with this breakup, met him from time to time and communicated with him, but was not going to reunite because of fear. When Martinez found out that her boyfriend was communicating with his ex, she made a terrible scandal, and in a fit of rage screamed that she would kill them both. By that time, Mario had already realized what his chosen one was capable of, so he promised her that it would not happen again. However, Rocio's such an answer did not calm down, and she decided to destroy her rival, if not physically, then morally. Rocio began to call Denise, showering her with insults and wishing her a speedy death. But this was not enough, and she began to send messages to her rival with threats of violent reprisals. However, Dragon considered these threats to be empty words and did not consider it necessary to contact the police because of them. During that period, Rocio became pregnant, about which the first thing she wrote to her rival, saying that this child is desired and she will keep it. For Denise, this news was a painful blow. But soon Martinez, due to poor health and addiction to illegal substances, lost the child, and all her anger she again poured out in a new threatening message to Denise. Denise, eager to start a new life and soon forget about Mario, started an affair with a young man named Evan. The couple legalized their relationship just a month after meeting, and the young lady went to live in her husband's house. Apparently, Mario was hurt that his ex-girlfriend had married someone else so quickly. He started looking for meetings with her again, calling and texting her. In November 2018, when Mario and Rocio were having dinner at a small diner on the outskirts of the city, the guy went out for a while, leaving his phone on the table. Rocio, taking advantage of the moment, decided to check it out. There she came across the calls and messages Mario had been sending to Denise. Martinez immediately threw a tantrum. She screamed, cried, and tried to hit her young man. In response, Mario offered his girlfriend to personally clarify relations with Denise, to which she immediately agreed. He drove the furious Rocio to the new home of his former lover and pointed to the right door. Rocio got out of the car with a knife and went to the doorstep of her rival. At the time, Evan had not yet returned from work, and his young wife was home alone, talking on the phone with her friend Sylvia. When she heard a knock on the door, she assumed it was her husband and simply opened the door without looking through the peephole. Denise was still talking to her friend, so she could hear everything that happened next. When Denise saw her ex-lover's friend on the doorstep, she only had time to say her name in surprise and loudly before she was stabbed in the stomach. After that, Rocio immediately left, and the wounded Denise, losing consciousness, asked her friend to call an ambulance and told her who attacked her. Dragone was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors fought desperately for her life for several hours, but the wound was too deep. She lost a lot of blood, and it was alas impossible to save her. After Rocio dealt the fatal blow to her rival, she ran back to the car, jumped into the cabin, and told Mario to get out of here. On the way, she confessed everything to him, and together they disposed of the crime weapon and washed the traces of blood off her hands and clothes. Mario decided it would be best for them to hide for a while. He called his relatives who lived in another city and asked them to visit. When they arrived, the relatives noticed that Rocio looked strange and was very nervous, but she wrote it off as malaise. The couple stayed overnight at Mario's relative's house, thinking about what to do and how to proceed. When they learned the next morning that Denise had died from the wound, Rocio immediately called her father and told him everything. She was sure that her dad would use all his connections to save her from jail. This time, however, the policeman father did not help his daughter, who had taken another man's life. He followed her to another city and then handed her over to the police himself. One of the main witnesses in the case was Sylvia, who at the time of the crime spoke to the deceased on the phone. The case file also included numerous threatening messages that Rocio had sent to her rival over the course of several months. The defendant initially tried to deny her guilt, but all the facts and evidence were against her. Then Rocio apparently began to lose her nerve, and she confessed to everything, giving a detailed account of the attack. She noted that it was Mario who pushed her to do it, who drove her to the victim's house and allowed her to take the knife that was in the car. Rossio suggested that he wanted to take revenge on Denise with her hands. Surprisingly, Topanera himself was only a witness in the case, not an accomplice. He completely denied his guilt and said that he only brought Rossio to his ex-girlfriend's house so that they could finally work things out and stop feuding. He also said he didn't realize Rossio had a knife and didn't see any blood on her hands or clothes when she returned to his car. At the next court hearing, the couple again denied their guilt, saying this time that they were not at the scene at all. Allegedly, they had spent the entire evening at Mario's relative's house, and Denise had been fatally stabbed by someone else. Martinez claimed that she had no hatred for her rival and had no motive to kill her. Nevertheless, Rossio's guilt was proven, and she went to prison for 18.5 years, but Mario remained completely unpunished. He almost immediately spun a new novel and, forgetting about any caution, began to brag that the girls fought him ready to kill each other. He told in detail about the events of that tragic evening, and this information quickly reached the parents of the dead Denise. The Dragone family again appealed to the court, demanding to punish the man who was responsible for the death of their daughter, and this time Topanera was taken into custody. But after a few days, the guy was released on his own recognizance. In the end, he was acquitted, and he was released again. Denise's parents tried several times to appeal the court decision, demanding to increase the term for Rossio and to put Mario in jail as an accomplice. However, to this day, Mario has not been brought to justice. "Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house?" Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slayton. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slayton, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slayton was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slayton. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slayton. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slayton family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartselle, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slayton began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of 2 brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of 2 defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slayton's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slayton family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slayton brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slayton. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. "I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me," he often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slayton's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slayton brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slayton's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slayton. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slayton brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills's guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slayton's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills's DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slayton's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slayton. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slayton's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slayton's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man who once seemed like a role model sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slayton, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slayton family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slayton brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slayton's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slayton, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed." Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slayton brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slayton. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slayton's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. The Irene Cortez case, an unfortunate accident or a contracted murder of a mother of many. They say a scorned woman is capable of unpredictable and desperate acts, with cold and cruel revenge being the most fearsome. But what about a scorned man? Many would say an offended man might resort to physical violence, drown his sorrows in alcohol, or combine these two scenarios. Yet men, generally less grudge-holding, can be more ingenious when it comes to revenge. The case of Irene Cortez, a Spanish citizen who met a mysterious end during a trip to Colombia, is complex and ambiguous. While her perpetrators were caught, convicted, and are currently serving long sentences, the deceased woman's family claims the real culprit remains at large and is portraying himself as a victim. Let's delve into this intricate story from the beginning and try to determine if a third party was involved, or if the murder was, indeed, unintentional. It's worth noting that each party involved is still trying to prove their version of the truth. Who was Irene Cortez? Irene Cortez, born Lucas, was born in 1980 in sunny Granada, Spain, the capital of the province of the same name. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a small but profitable business. According to some reports, her father passed away early, but her mother, Maria Lucas, took over the business operations, expanded the enterprise, and ensured her children lacked for nothing. Maria's older brother, Uncle Pedro Lucas, was also a significant help. Irene was the eldest of the three children. A beautiful and sociable girl, she loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and was already pregnant. At 17, she became a mother for the first time, and 2 years later, she had her second child. Her mother and uncle provided considerable support, allowing her to pursue a good education despite early motherhood. In the early 2000s, Irene moved to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and 2 children. There, she opened an entertainment venue that quickly became popular and profitable. Initially a small disco bar, it eventually transformed into a full-fledged nightclub. In Malaga, the couple welcomed their third child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. At 25, Irene's husband was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Tragically, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. The responsibility of raising the children fell solely on Irene's shoulders. Remembering how her mother single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. She successfully managed her business, earned well, and had big plans for the future. Relationship with Farid Henessares. Farid Henessares, a native of Barranquilla, Colombia, was born in 1976. Growing up in a large, impoverished family, he was the youngest of his siblings. His parents separated in the early 90s when he was still a teenager. His older siblings were independent by then, and Farid stayed with his mother. In 2001, at 25, Farid, along with his elderly mother, moved to Spain in search of a better life. They settled in Malaga, where Farid took any job he could to support himself and his mother. In 2005, he started working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. Irene immediately noticed Farid's hard work and reliability. She was also attracted to him, and Farid in turn did his best to please her. At the time, Irene's husband was incarcerated, and she planned to file for divorce but couldn't before her husband's untimely demise. Irene and Farid's employer-employee relationship soon blossomed into romance. Farid wasn't deterred by Irene's 3 children from previous relationships, nor was Irene bothered by Farid's humble background as a waiter whose salary she paid. Within months of starting their relationship, the couple decided to move in together. They settled in Irene's spacious apartment, and soon after, Irene became pregnant with Farid's child. They went on to have 2 children together. It's unclear if they were officially married, but Irene kept her first husband's surname, while the children born with Farid carried the Henessares surname. Imprisonment and infidelity. In 2009, Irene's past seemed to repeat itself. Like her first husband, Farid was arrested for distributing illegal substances and sent to prison. Once again, Irene was left alone, this time with 5 children. Farid was sentenced to 3 years, but served only 1.5, being released early for good behavior and cooperation with the investigation. However, soon after Farid's imprisonment, Irene found solace in the arms of another man and lived with him for those 1.5 years. Farid learned of her infidelity only after his release. Understandably furious, he threatened Irene and her lover and almost attacked the man, narrowly avoiding another legal issue. Eventually, they resolved the matter peacefully. Farid forgave Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed living together as if there had been no imprisonment or infidelity. Irene's relatives were always skeptical about Farid. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting Farid was only interested in Irene's money. Also, Irene's older children from her first marriage never accepted Farid, while the youngest, whom Farid had raised since the child was 2, saw him as a father figure. Fateful trip to Colombia. In early 2011, Irene's husband, Farid, expressed the need to visit his homeland of Colombia due to his father's severe illness. Reportedly, Farid's estranged father was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the dire situation. Irene, who had long wished to visit Farid's homeland, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Farid's father, whom she had never met, and also experience the legendary Barranquilla Carnival, typically held in late February. Moreover, Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation for years due to her dedication to work and raising her 5 children, saw this trip as an opportunity for a much-needed break. The couple planned a 10-day trip across the ocean, with Irene's mother and younger sister agreeing to care for her children during this period. Despite her mother, Maria Louisa's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene disregarded her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Despite this, Irene had personal savings of 3,000 euros in cash hidden at home. But on the eve of their trip, she discovered the money had mysteriously vanished, almost derailing their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends. She also booked their flight tickets and a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that, tragically, would be her last. Mysterious murder. On February 27, 2011, the couple arrived in Colombia. The flight was uneventful, and they immediately checked into their hotel. Irene called home to reassure her mother. However, 2 days later, Farid informed Irene's eldest son, 14, of his mother's death. Initially, Farid claimed an accident, but it was soon revealed that Irene was murdered during a robbery at a Barranquilla entertainment venue. The case quickly became a major news story in Colombia. The narrative was that Irene, a Spanish tourist, was killed by robbers who fled the scene, triggering a citywide police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed unusual and suspicious. The attackers did not appear to be trying to steal anything, but instead shot Irene in the heart and then fled in haste. Police and local media representatives quickly arrived on the scene. Despite the fact that Farid witnessed the shooting of his partner during an interview with journalists, he looked quite calm, not corresponding to the image of a grief-stricken widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed the murder, adding that Irene's remains will be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd have yet to be clarified by investigators. In the meantime, authorities are actively pursuing the attackers responsible for this senseless crime. Surveillance footage. The case of Irene Cortez's mysterious death seemed to gain clarity after reviewing surveillance footage from cameras installed at the location where the murder occurred. On March 1st, Irene and her partner, Farid Genesares, had planned to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 enjoyed the carnival, walked around town, and then, at Farid's suggestion, went to a local bar for dinner and entertainment. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers at the bar, as surveillance footage clearly shows. Around 2 a.m., 2 young men sitting away from the group entered the bar. They did not order anything and did not look comfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager because of their suspicious behavior. Moreover, their young appearance made the manager check whether they were of legal age. The young men refused to show their IDs and, when asked to leave, one of them pulled out a gun and aimed it at the manager. His accomplice produced a knife, but soon retreated out of the camera's view. The armed assailant pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing a robbery and demanding mobile phones and cash. His knife-wielding partner reappeared, presumably to collect valuables while the gunman kept the group under threat. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Confronting Irene, the gunman ordered Farid to stand for a pocket search. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant lunged at her with the sane hand holding the gun. A shot was fired as he grabbed the purse, striking Irene directly in the chest. She collapsed to the floor as the assailants fled without taking anything. Farid and his brother chased after them while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding and his brother's wife called for emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits were too fast to catch. The men returned to the bar, attempting to aid Irene, but it was too late. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet Irene succumbed to her injuries en route to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. The hunt for the perpetrators, arrest and trial. In the wake of the robbery and homicide that took Irene Cortez's life, law enforcement mobilized all available resources. The city was teeming with tourists for the carnival, and ensuring their safety was paramount. A reward of 10 million pesos, about 3,500 euros, was announced for information leading to the culprits. The first suspect, the gunman Brian Dario, was apprehended the next day. He quickly implicated his accomplice, Juan Carlos. Juan, 18, surrendered to authorities, hoping for leniency. During interrogation, Dario claimed dire financial straits, debts, and a sick child in need of costly treatment drove him to the crime, corroborated later by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring while trying to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos contended he was an unwitting participant. He said Brian didn't reveal his plans but asked for backup in a job. He claimed to have only a small knife for intimidation, not harm, and left the scene once he realized Brian's intentions. However, surveillance footage contradicted his claims, showing him returning to Brian. With both perpetrators in custody and their confessions, the case appeared solved, with prison sentences looming. The court found Dario guilty of robbery and homicide under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to 23 years. Carlos received 17 years for complicity in these crimes. Accusations against Farid and new crime details. From the early stages of the investigation, the family of the deceased woman openly accused Farid of orchestrating the murder of his wife. Irene's mother and uncle hired a detective who conducted an independent investigation, gathering additional materials and evidence to hold the man accountable and prove his involvement in the crime. Starting with the earlier mentioned disappearance of €3,000 from the hiding place in Cortez's house. According to Maria Lucas, only Farid knew about this money, and he was the only one who could have discreetly taken it. The woman told her daughter about this from the beginning, but she did not want to listen. Now, she believed that her son-in-law used this money to pay Dario to kill his wife. Another weighty argument was the fabricated illness of the man's father, whom he was so eager to visit. It turned out that no cancer diagnosis was made for the elderly parent, and he was quite healthy for his age. Farid concocted this story, making it the main pretext for the trip to Colombia. Also, it was Ganisaris who initiated the visit to that fateful establishment. Moreover, he insisted on continuing the feast deep into the night when all the other visitors had long dispersed, and their company was alone in the hall. Further, the detective conducted a detailed analysis of those very recordings from the cameras, giving an assessment of what was happening and making his own conclusions. He noticed that the criminals acted strangely. Juan was clearly scared and, most likely, really did not understand what was happening while Brian approached the company, came up to Farid and raised him, but did not directly threaten him with a gun. It looked like the men knew each other and acted cohesively. Then Farid, strangely, moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table. When she reached into her bag to get her wallet, the criminal with the gun looked at the man as if waiting for a signal. It's hard to say exactly whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband were back to the camera. After the shot, the man chased the killer, but, in the expert's opinion, he deliberately let him escape. However, the latter statement can be considered controversial, as Brian was armed with a gun and Farid could reasonably fear for his life. Also in question was the man's behavior after his chosen one was declared dead. He willingly gave interviews to the arrived correspondents, talked about the details of what happened, and, at the same time, did not look too upset or depressed. Another important question: why, after the tragedy, did Ganisaris call not Irene's mother, not her uncle, or any of the adult relatives, but dialed the number of her 14-year-old son to tell him about his mother's death? According to Maria Lucas, he wanted to personally inflict pain on the teenager, punishing him for not recognizing the stepfather's authority and treating him disrespectfully. The woman's uncle was the first to dare to give an interview in the press and openly talk about his suspicions and the results of the investigation. Pedro Lucas was sure that Farid planned the trip in advance, essentially luring Irene into a trap. The money stolen from her was used to pay for the services of a hired killer, and after her death, he planned to establish guardianship over the children and take over the business of his deceased wife. Farid's mother did not silently listen to her son being accused of a terrible crime and openly stood up for her offspring. The woman claimed that her offspring was madly in love with Irene and her children and would never harm her. However, in the end, the parent inadvertently let slip a phrase about the chosen one not having to cheat on Farid, as this greatly offended his pride. Also, an unpleasant detail emerged about Ganisaris leaving Spain on fake documents, as he was not allowed to leave the country because he had recently been released from prison on parole. The man himself denied this information, stating that he left legally and Irene acted as his guarantor. Funeral. Without the widower. 12 days after the tragedy, Irene's body was returned to her native Spain. The funeral was conducted with a closed casket, as the remains had begun to decompose after such an extended period. Hundreds attended the funeral: family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but had heard about the resonant story and wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person missing from the farewell ceremony was Farid, who simply feared returning from Colombia, apprehensive of retribution. Farid claimed that the relatives of his late wife had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. For this reason, before flying back to Spain, he intended to appeal to the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to be able to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Genesars decided not to take the risk. In turn, Farid filed a complaint in court against the relatives of his deceased wife, who, he alleged, hindered his return home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they were most interested in his return to face trial in Spain. Additional court proceedings. With new circumstances and accusations against Farid, an additional investigation and court proceedings were conducted. Dario and Carlos, already serving their sentences in a Colombian prison, were interrogated about their acquaintance with Genesars and a possible premeditated conspiracy. However, Brian categorically denied this assumption. He continued to insist that the murder was an accidental result of a failed robbery attempt. He claimed he had never seen Farid before, let alone been hired as a hitman for his wife. The accusations indeed seemed to be grasping at straws, with no irrefutable evidence of premeditation or a contract killing, only assumptions and interpretations of the events on the recording. Dario also confessed that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances that evening, hence his poor recollection of the event's chronology. As for Carlos, he maintained that his friend did not involve him in his plans, and everything that happened in the bar was as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Blanc appeared to be telling the truth, but Brian's words, who made the fatal shot, raised some doubts. Consider this. He failed to commit the robbery, ended up in prison, but his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people, learning about his motive, helped him. However, the Lucas family's lawyers tried to prove that the 3,000 euros stolen from Irene, which Farid paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment. Supposedly, Brian agreed to sacrifice himself and go to prison to save his child and secretly pass the money to his wife. This version, however, was never proven, returned to Spain. Only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety did Genesars decide to return to Spain. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Genesars claimed to have brought investigation materials proving his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months later, Farid decided to give a major interview in which he revealed that he had lost virtually everything. He was jobless, his passport had been annulled, preventing him from leaving the country, and to add insult to injury, his friends had turned their backs on him, and the mother and uncle of his late wife forbade him from seeing his children. Genesars repeatedly faced Maria and Pedro Lucas in court. He accused them of threatening him while they attempted to prove his involvement in Irene's murder. However, neither side could substantiate their claims. Ultimately, the children remained in the custody of their grandmother and uncle, and the widower was unable to claim any of his late wife's property, an innocent victim of her spouse's perverse passion. They say that an adult is simply impossible to re-educate because it is a formed personality with its views, way of thinking, preferences, character, and temperament. However, some women are sure that patience and pedagogical talent can work wonders. More experienced women realize that it is important from the very beginning to consider the man who is next to her, to study his shortcomings, and to understand whether she can live together with them, because falling in love and passion will pass, and the negative qualities with age will only worsen. If it is not about some minor shortcomings, but about real problems, such as addictions, pathological tendency to lie and violence and so on, it is better to run away from such a person without looking back. But in women, often in such cases, manifests the rescuer syndrome, an acute desire and irrepressible desire to help, at the cost of their own well-being. It is this syndrome ruined a young British woman named Vicky Roberts, who almost 3 years struggling for her love, trying to re-educate her cheating husband with sadistic tendencies. Unfortunately for the girl, all her efforts turned out only pain, humiliation, and cruelty. Vicky and Michael Roberts. Vicky Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in the county of Cheshire, in the northwest of England. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a rather conservative and deeply religious family. Together with her sister, she attended a Christian school and also practiced music and sang in the choir. People around her described her as a very kind, friendly, and helpful girl, always ready to help others. After graduating from high school, Vicky went to university and at the same time got a job in one of the stores of the chain IKEA to pay for her own education. It was there that the girl soon met a young man named Michael Roberts, with whom she first started a friendly relationship. The new acquaintance was only a year older than Vicky. He also got a job at IKEA in parallel with his studies, and he also played sports, carefully watched himself, and was able to make a pleasant impression on others. At first, the sociable and charismatic Michael seemed too talkative and overly intrusive to the modest Vicky, but he quickly managed to gain her attention and favor. It is worth saying a few words about Michael and his family. He was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, and was the eldest of 2 sons in the family of a prominent chemical engineer. Parents brought up their children in strictness, and high expectations always laid on the eldest heir, who studied well at school, grew up ambitious, purposeful, and able to achieve what they wanted. The guy always had a lot of friends. He could easily become the soul of any company, but most of all, he was proud of his victories on the love front. Michael had a bright and attractive appearance, was tall, trim, with a good sense of humor, and the ability to show himself at his best. To everything else, this handsome man was also very intelligent, well-read, could easily support a conversation on any topic. Parents from childhood indoctrinated the eldest heir that he is the best, the most beautiful, intelligent, and will certainly succeed. All this probably provoked in the guy narcissistic disorder, which with age progressed. At the same time, Michael was always very afraid to upset his dad and mom, and therefore did everything to be the perfect son for them, and meet all their expectations. Roberts never had a permanent girlfriend. He regularly changed girlfriends and mistresses, could spin several novels in parallel, so that none of his passions did not realize that she was not the only one. The guy was confident in his irresistibility, could find an approach to any girl, and he really liked to conquer unavailable girls. This process he perceived as a kind of game or competition. Just such a modest and inaccessible girl was Vicky, which Michael decided by all means to conquer. At first, she stubbornly kept her distance and refused even innocent offers to walk after work or drink coffee somewhere. Smith spent almost all her time studying, and on weekends she went to church, so she didn't even think about dating, let alone any relationship. It took Michael a few months for Vicky to finally agree to go out with him. He was sweet, charming, touchingly courted her, gave her flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even invited her to a family dinner at his parents' house, who liked Vicky very much and immediately approved of their son's choice. Vicky believed he was serious and gave in. He became her first man and remained the only one. She was truly happy around him, and it seemed like fate to her. Michael also seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but it didn't last long. 50 Shades of Michael. From the outside, their romance seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambition, and made huge plans for the future. But soon Vicky realized that her chosen one has one peculiarity, namely, an irrepressible sexual appetite and passion for experimentation in bed. At first, he did not put too much pressure on his chosen one in this regard, fearing that Vicky would leave him, but as soon as the guy realized that she would not go anywhere from him, he, as they say, opened the cards. The modest and religious girl was literally shocked by what was happening, but she was head over heels in love with Michael, and therefore trusted him, and for a long time did not tell anyone about what was happening in their bedroom behind closed doors. In addition, her lover made her an official marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted, sincerely believing that after the wedding everything will change and the chosen one will stop his experiments. Soon, one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she carefully disguises and hides bruises and small bruises under her clothes. She brought Smith into a frank conversation and asked if her fiancé was beating her and if she needed help. Vicky tried to deny everything, but then still admitted that all these marks are the consequences of intimate experiments Michael, who had a special passion for binding, the use of various toys and devices. She also secretly told her friend that they have with the chosen intimacy happens up to 5 times a day, while he still remains hungry and unsatisfied. Michael considered himself a skillful lover, and intimacy for him was a kind of art and a way of self-expression. Sometimes he made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some completely crazy and even dangerous experiments, but in most cases, he still managed to persuade the girl in love with him. Unplanned pregnancy. After defending her diploma, Vicky decided to change jobs and was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also quit IKEA and got a job as a sales consultant in one of the stores of a large retail chain, selling phones, laptops, and other electronics. He almost immediately became one of the best employees because thanks to his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills, he always exceeded sales targets. Soon, the new young employee was promoted to senior salesman, and the management seriously considered his transfer to the main office. But before that, he had to undergo training and improve his qualifications. Michael enjoyed attending training sessions, going on business trips to London, and was very proud of himself. He seemed to have forgotten all about his young fiancée, and only remembered when he needed intimacy. They didn't talk about each other. They hardly ever went anywhere together, and outside the bedroom, Vicky seemed to cease to exist for him. At the same time, he began to have affairs on the side with colleagues, clients, and just casual acquaintances. Michael was literally obsessed and addicted to intimacy, and intimacy with different women, and constant new victories on the personal front were an important part of maintaining his self-esteem. At this time, Vicky discovered that she was pregnant and happily broke the news to her fiancé. They had already delayed the wedding, and it seemed to the girl that now Michael would hurry things up. But the news that he was going to be a father only made Michael angry and mad. He immediately began to insist that the child should be gotten rid of because they are still so young and they have their whole life ahead of them, and with offspring can wait. Vicky was shocked by such words, but flatly refused to terminate the pregnancy. Then the groom decided to press her in another way. Michael began to convince the bride that such news will cause anger in her religious parents, because their youngest favorite daughter lived with a man and got pregnant without being married. However, according to him, the termination of pregnancy will be hidden from everyone, and after the wedding, they will certainly have children. For Vicky, it was a difficult decision, but her chosen one had a real gift of persuasion, so that a few days later she gave in to persuasion and went to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was not without complications. Vicky for a few days stayed in the hospital, and then it took her almost 3 weeks to recover her health. For all this period, the doctor categorically forbade her to have an intimate life, and Michael, learning about it, went into a rage. Then Vicky finally realized that he had mental problems and a real addiction to sexual contacts. Beloved literally went crazy without intimacy and began to leave the house every day, explaining it with urgent matters at work. Vicky guessed that he was looking for intimacy on the side, but sincerely hoped that everything would change once they got married and she would help him get rid of this addiction. A loveless marriage and an adult mistress. The engagement lasted almost 2 years, and the man, apparently, did not even intend to marry the chosen one, because the current state of affairs suited him quite well. He had a fiancée who faithfully waited for him at home and fully served him in the household, and numerous mistresses on the side which he regularly changed. Vicky always took him at his word, and even if she found out about his cheating, she always forgave him, as long as he promised that it was the last time and he would not do it again. But time passed. Vicky began to insist on marriage, as she wanted a full-fledged family and children. Also, this question was increasingly raised by her parents, but most importantly, the wedding was insisted on by Michael's parents, whom he really did not want to upset. Modest and sweet Vicky, they liked them very much, and they considered her a great couple for their son, and were constantly interested in when they will get married and make them happy with grandchildren. Not without the help of their parents, the couple organized a lavish wedding with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful away ceremony. The newlyweds looked in love and happy. It seemed that they had a long life ahead of them. But hardly any of the relatives guessed about the dark side of the man, with which his young chosen one was already so well acquainted. The newlyweds settled in a large and cozy house in the prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Roberts's parents. Michael did not love his spouse, however. Marriage made him normal in the eyes of relatives and others. Vicky never complained to anyone about his strange predilections and constant cheating, and he could continue to change mistresses like gloves. At work, he was quite successful, got another promotion, and was making good money. After being transferred to a new office, Michael's direct boss was a certain Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones 4U. She was 10 years older than him, had been divorced for a long time, and was raising a son on her own. At the same time, Carrie was quite attractive, well-groomed, and, as her position required, determined and strong-willed. For a long time, she did not pay any attention to the signs of attention that she was given by a young subordinate. However, for the guy it became a kind of signal to action. He sought to achieve this woman, connecting all his natural charm and eloquence, and after about a month, Carrie reciprocated. Lovers began to meet regularly in hotel rooms, and their relationship the woman later described as turbulent, passionate, and full of experimentation. Carrie was a mature, self-confident woman. She was undoubtedly flattered by the attention of such a young man, and she was also not opposed to trying something new. So Michael could realize with her those fantasies, which did not dare his modest wife. He constantly lied to his wife about being late at work, attending corporate trainings and the like, and told his mistress how unhappy he was in marriage, that this union was a mistake of youth, and said that he was ready to divorce, but his wife does not give him a divorce. This relationship with Carrie lasted more than a year, but since the woman had no illusions about Michael, she did not insist on divorce, and she was quite satisfied with their meetings in hotels, marks on the body, and dangerous games. After the beginning of relations with Michael, Carrie began to give preference to buried clothes with long sleeves and high throat, which was unusual for her. The woman was actively engaged in sports, and always liked to show others her stunning figure. And here suddenly, completely changed her style. Once Hall admitted to her close friend that her lover loves to experiment in intimate terms, and sometimes these experiments go beyond reason. As evidence, she showed a bite mark on her chest, which Michael left in a fit of passion. Also on her neck there were blue marks from squeezing by his hands, and on her wrists there were marks from the ropes, with which the boyfriend liked to tie her so that she was completely in his power. The friend was horrified and suggested that Carrie go to the police, but she refused, noting that all this was consensual, and in most cases, he warns her about what he is going to do, but the process itself can get out of control. For example, Michael loved to strangle his partner, convincing her that it would increase the pleasant sensations of the process. But a couple of times he was so much carried away that she lost consciousness. Vicky was very afraid of such games with strangulation, but every time she succumbed to her husband's persuasions and believed that one day he would get tired of it. He would leave his cruel and painful experiments, or she would get used to it and would perceive them as something ordinary. Unfortunately, neither his wife nor any of his mistresses even tried to stop Michael. Open correspondence and a love letter. Vicky had guessed about her chosen one's affairs on the side, even before they were married. She, most likely, even realized that he was addicted to it, but sincerely believed that something was about to change, and her love and care can turn daring and loving Michael into an exemplary family man. But after the wedding, the situation only worsened, and the young husband himself denied his cheating, and he did it very convincingly. Vicky decided to conduct her own personal investigation and looked into her husband's phone while he was sleeping. There she found numerous correspondence Michael with Carrie and several other girls, which he did not even bother to delete. Their content was quite intimate, moreover, With some girls, the guy exchanged explicit photos. This came as a shock to Vicky. She packed her things and decided to move in with her friend for a while. She did not tell her parents and sister anything about what was happening, afraid to upset them. So her family was sure that Vicky was happily married. Besides, religious relatives would have insisted on a divorce when they learned of her husband's infidelity. But after all, Vicky was in love and didn't want to break up with her husband. Leaving, she wrote Michael a touching letter in which she confessed her love for him and called the main man in her life. At the same time, she admitted that she knows about his cheating and does not want to put up with it and therefore leaves, but gives him time to think about it and will not yet file for divorce. She wrote it all by hand on paper and left it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Michael was not touched by the message or saddened by the departure of his wife, but he did not want to lose a quiet and submissive woman who always waited for him at home, fully served in the household, and tolerated any of his antics as well as peculiar predilections. That same evening, he followed Vicky to her friend's house, picking up a large bouquet of flowers on the way. Michael on his knees apologized and begged her to return to him, promising that from now on she would be his only woman. Vicky once again believed, or rather she wanted to believe, and returned to their home, a new mistress. Naturally, Michael did not leave Carrie and continued to meet with other women, but for a while he was extremely careful and even tried to come home for dinner, which his wife carefully prepared. He hid his phone, deleted correspondence, and even changed the password from his social networking page. At that time, he began to have an affair with a new young female employee of the company, Karen Wilson, not stopping the relationship with Carrie. At that time, the girl had a fiancé, and she was preparing for the wedding, but Michael began to persistently pursue her, making himself a miserable lover. He was so attracted to the new object of the hunt that after 2 months, he decided to break off the relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, which he was tired of. The man told Karen a proven legend about how he is unhappy in marriage, and for the sake of her ready to leave his wife. Soon she surrendered, and between them happened intimacy right in the office, and a week after that she broke off the engagement and waited for the lover to respond. However, Michael was not going to divorce, but also to interrupt the connection with a new mistress he did not want, and therefore just lied to her that he had already filed for divorce and moved to live in the house of his parents. Fatal blackmail. Vicky soon suspected that her spouse continued to cheat on her, and this time decided to act for sure. She took Michael's phone while he was in the shower, but could not find anything there, because he had taken into account his previous mistakes and deleted all text messages, and on the page in the social network now had a different password. Then Vicky waited until her husband fell asleep and took his work laptop, which he always carried with him, and on which, as it turned out, he did not leave his account in the social network. There, Vicky found correspondences with an already new girlfriend, in which her husband confessed his love to her, claimed that he was divorcing his wife and living with his parents. It was a real shock for her. She took screenshots of the love and intimate messages exchanged between the couple and saved them on her laptop, so that she could have proof of her husband's infidelity. Vicky also looked in her husband's wallet, where she found several folded checks for hotel rooms. In the morning, she presented all this to her spouse, and for the first time in their entire time together, she gave him a scandal. Michael was discouraged. He tried to apologize again and promised that it would not happen again, but Vicky suddenly said that she would tell his parents about everything, hoping that they would be able to talk some sense into him, since she could not do it. Michael was literally mad from such threats. He did not want his parents to know anything, and slapped his wife. Then Vicky got up and said that she would go to them immediately, and then headed for the door. Her spouse caught up with her, hit her twice in the head with a heavy jewelry box he grabbed from the dressing table, and after she lost consciousness, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. The man felt no pity or remorse. He wrapped the body in a blanket and packed it into several large garbage bags, and then carried the gruesome bundle into his garage. Michael then quickly cleaned up the house, packed and removed most of his wife's belongings, and immediately called Karen, whom he invited over. They had dinner, had fun in the house, where a couple of hours ago Roberts killed his own wife and then made love in the bedroom, where, in fact, everything happened. Ran off with her lover? The very next day, Michael informed his parents that his wife left him, having run away with another man. To do this, he personally went to their home and literally sobbed on his mother's shoulder, showing her messages from his wife, which he himself sent from Vicky's phone. The messages said that she had fallen out of love with him, met another man, and decided to live with him. Parents, as they could, consoled their son and sincerely bewildered how their sweet, kind, and religious daughter-in-law could do such a thing. In parallel with the phone of the deceased, Michael sent messages and her parents, which said that she fell in love with another, left with him, and asked for now not to bother her and give time. Naturally, the couple Smith immediately rushed to call their daughter to find out everything and hear her explanations, but the calls were constantly rejected, and in response only came messages asking to give her time. This seemed very strange to Vicky's parents, and they went to Michael's house to talk to him, but his story only raised more questions and doubts. And after they found out that Vicky was not showing up for work without saying anything to anyone, they decided to go to the police. An investigation, a gruesome discovery, and an escape. On the 1st of December 2009, Michael bought a shovel, several meters of rope, as well as rags and detergents from a hardware store. However, he did not manage to get rid of the body, because on the same day the police visited him at home. Then the police could not find anything suspicious, but Michael's behavior and story raised a lot of questions and doubts. However, the strangest thing was that they did not pay attention to the huge package in the corner of the garage during the inspection. In the house, there were no clothes, documents, and personal belongings of the missing woman, which could indicate that she had left. But Vicky's laptop was in the bedroom, and the police seized it for inspection. There, they found screenshots of Michael's correspondence with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved, and then decided to make a geolocation request to Vicky's cell phone, from which regularly came messages to her husband and relatives. And then it turned out that the phone had been in her and Michael's marital home all along. After that, law enforcers again visited the house of Roberts and conducted a more thorough search, finally unwrapping a strange package in the garage. The find shocked everyone present, but then it was discovered that Michael, who had been walking with the police all this time, disappeared somewhere right under their noses. He took with him a wallet with cash, so that several days he managed to hide without giving himself away. Arrest, trial, and conviction. When the money ran out, Michael came to one of his mistresses, whose name was Lavinia Talley, and asked to live in her house for a while. In the evening, the girl heard from the news that her lover was wanted on charges of murdering his wife, and immediately, without hesitation, reported to the police about his whereabouts. At the time of his arrest, Michael was crying and said he was innocent of anything. The man insisted that his spouse died during their intimate games when she asked to strangle her with a rope belt, and he overdid it. However, forensic experts found that firstly, the woman was strangled with her bare hands, secondly, she was attacked from the back, and thirdly, there are 2 extensive hematomas on her head received during her lifetime, which can definitely have nothing to do with intimate relations. The trial of the perpetrator began in January 2010. The defendant kept insisting that his wife's death was the result of an accident and hoped for leniency. However, the autopsy results presented by experts proved that the man in cold blood hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her and hid the body in the garage. Michael Roberts was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, the court left him the possibility of applying for parole after 17 years in prison. That is, the criminal has a good chance of being released in 2027. You've probably heard more than once about the search for someone who has vanished without a trace. We all, in one way or another, encounter this phenomenon in everyday life. Missing person notices are commonly seen on the streets, broadcasted on TV or radio, and posted on social media. Those missing can be of various age groups, genders, social statuses, and nationalities. Most often, it's the elderly who are being searched for. Unfortunately, senile dementia and other mental disorders in older people can lead to confusion. As a result, they wander off in unknown directions. Children are the most vulnerable population. In most cases, their disappearances are due to abductions. But what about young people? Those who, it seems, shouldn't just disappear. They are healthy and rational. Often, the reasons for their sudden disappearances are violent acts committed against them. Sometimes, to conceal a crime and avoid accountability, hiding a body becomes a simpler solution. There's a legal maxim that goes, "No body, no crime." However, this is with the slight caveat that the guilt of the accused or the defendant isn't confirmed by a totality of other evidence. Strange events. A complex story unfolded in the family of Graciella Garcia from Hermiston, Oregon, USA. The renowned 49-year-old beauty salon owner disappeared on November 8, 2019. That evening, she planned to have dinner with her 14-year-old son, Jacob, who was at his father's house. Imagine the teenager's surprise when, around 7 p.m., instead of his mother, his stepfather, Romero, appeared at the doorstep, delivering food. Typically, the man wasn't known for his care and attention. He didn't make efforts to connect with the boy, even though they lived in the same house. Nonetheless, Jacob didn't suspect anything wrong. The stepfather explained that Graciella had fallen asleep, so he came instead. After they said goodbye, the boy went to his room and checked his phone. There were 2 missed calls and a text from his mom. When he tried to call her back, he reached her voicemail. Jacob was very worried that his mother didn't respond. It was a bad sign because she was always reachable, especially since they had planned to meet. After a short while, the boy decided to tell his older brother and sisters about the situation. That evening, none of them could get through to her. Everyone thought that the mother had indeed gone to bed early and would get in touch the next day. However, the family was also concerned that her phone was unavailable to clients as it served as a link between them and Graciella. Later, the younger daughter Gabby often recalled a strange conversation with her mother. Initially happy about the meeting, the woman became sad and thoughtful. Then, she seriously informed that the children should know where she kept important documents and money, just in case. Graciella seemed to be worried about something. She showed the safe and shared the PIN code. She also added that the money and the house deed belonged to them, which couldn't be said about her current husband, Cuauhtemoc Romero Sanchez. Gabby was frightened by the conversation. Her mother was healthy and relatively young. She asked her mother what prompted this talk. However, Graciella didn't elaborate. "No one ever knows what the future holds," she mysteriously replied. They never returned to that topic. Surprisingly, over time, the woman's words became prophetic. Gabby often wondered if her mother could have anticipated the tragedy, or if her disappearance was just an unfortunate coincidence. Graciella's journey. Graciella Garcia was born on October 6, 1970 in Mexico. Her family was among the working class. Seeking a better future for their children, her parents decided to emigrate to the USA, where they eventually settled in Hermiston, Oregon. At the time of the move, Graciella was still very young, so she didn't remember the hardships of changing her place of residence. She graduated from Umatilla High School, which primarily catered to low-income populations. All students there received free lunches and breakfasts. With 66% of the students being Hispanic, Graciella easily found friends among them. Her sociability and natural charm distinguished her. Later, she enrolled in Blue Mountain College in the business department. From childhood, she dreamed of connecting her life with the art of hairdressing, and even better, opening her own beauty salon. Graciella was determined and hardworking. Therefore, she sincerely believed that with the right approach, her plans could be realized. By February 2006, she became the owner of Carayes Beauty Salon. Thanks to her talent and charisma, she soon became well known in society. Moreover, the salon's owner always looked well-groomed, which only contributed to the establishment's image. She loved her job and had a great understanding of new beauty trends. Therefore, there was no shortage of clients. Over time, some of them became Graciella's friends and were welcome at her home. In general, her name was well regarded among the townspeople. Besides her career success, her personal life was also interesting and full of happy events. Beloved men. In her youth, she met a man with whom she fell deeply in love. He was her first love. From him, Graciella had daughters Annabelle and Gabriella, often simply called Gabby. The couple didn't stay together long. The man left the family. Apparently, his feelings for the woman changed over time. Left as a single mother, she didn't despair but focused on self-improvement and earned a degree in cosmetology. Later, fate brought her together with a man of Mexican descent. He was a kind soul, and Graciella liked him very much. She eventually married him. According to the children, she never regretted this decision. He was attentive not only to her, but also to her children, accepting them as his own. Later, the family was blessed with sons, Arthur and Jacob. Nonetheless, the man still called Annabelle and Gabriella his girls. Gabby recalled considering her stepfather her real father, as he always supported, protected, and cared for them. The couple did everything to ensure their family was united and happy. Raising 4 children didn't distract Graciella from her passion. On the contrary, whenever she went to professional meetings, she took them with her. The family always traveled together, which became a lovely tradition for everyone. Thanks to this, they visited many cities, got acquainted with local attractions and cultural features. Moreover, they didn't forget about their roots, often visiting Mexico. It was a good time for the Garcia family. Everyone tried their best to make the others happy. Unfortunately, after 17 years, the couple separated. The man and woman didn't want to torment each other with cooled feelings. They cherished the respectful relationship that had developed over many years. After the divorce, their interaction remained warm and strong. The father was always in touch with the children and saw them regularly. Graciella shared custody of their youngest son with her ex-husband. The other children were adults and lived separately from their parents. However, they always maintained constant contact with the family, celebrated holidays together, and often consulted with each other. Graciella went through the divorce calmly, not losing her optimism and faith in herself, thanks in large part to her ex-husband. Even during such a difficult period in life, the man behaved honorably and understandingly. Her beauty salon operated as usual, and she dedicated all her free time and energy to its development. Graciella immersed herself in her favorite work, taking a break only on Sundays. She spent this day surrounded by family and close friends. The unexpected visit. On the morning of November 9th, 2019, Romero stopped by Annabelle's, Graciella's eldest daughter. She was surprised by the unexpected visit from her mother's new husband. The man told her about his wife's disappearance. According to him, after meeting with Jacob the previous night, he returned home and lay down next to his sleeping wife. But in the morning, he found she wasn't there. After checking the house, he realized that she had gone somewhere. Romero tried calling and texting Graciella, but she didn't respond. He also explained that he visited Annabelle, hoping she might know something. However, the daughter had no such information. Moreover, she was shocked by Romero's words and his reaction to the situation. He was crying and seemed genuinely distressed. It was odd for her to see him this way, as he had never shown any emotions around them, except, perhaps, indifference. Romero also mentioned that Graciella had been acting strangely lately. He even suggested that she might have found someone else. He didn't deny that his wife might have needed a break from their relationship. In general, he wasn't sure she was genuinely happy with him and considered any reason for her disappearance. Annabelle found the man's words insincere and his tears theatrical. Moreover, she indeed started to worry about her mother as she found his behavior suspicious. Romero had always avoided communication with his wife's children, and suddenly, for some reason, he decided to turn to them. After Romero left, the girl decided to inform the rest of the family about what had happened. Where did the homeowner go? Graciella's children gathered around her house, determined to finally find out what was happening. Her car was parked on the driveway. If she had decided to leave Romero, she surely would have done so in her car. The second thing that caught their eye was the perfect order in their mother's house. Everything was so tidy that it looked overly perfect. Mrs. Garcia loved creative chaos. If she was going somewhere, her belongings and accessories would be scattered all over the room. She would spend a long time in front of the mirror, choosing an outfit for the new day. She loved her jewelry, yet at first glance, she left all her precious items at home. Graciella didn't even wear her favorite rings and necklaces, which she wore every day, not to mention other personal items. Everyone was concerned about what could make their mother step out in such a state. Their imagination painted terrifying pictures, one of which was fleeing. While going around the house, Gabby found something strange. A large blanket was lying in the washing machine. This could not but catch her attention, as their mother always taught them not to overload the appliances. The blanket was clearly heavy and someone else had washed it. Apparently, Romero himself. It was unlikely he would engage in household chores. Usually, Graciella took care of the house. Then what could this mean? Definitely that he was trying to hide something. However, the man did not comment on this in any way, citing that he does not pay attention to such details. Later, it was established that along with the homeowner, the following items disappeared from the house: passport, driver's license, and mobile phone. On November 11th, Annabelle contacted law enforcement. Visiting the police station, she was surprised. It turns out, Romero had not informed the police about his wife's disappearance, even though he knew about it since the 9th, or perhaps earlier. Thus, Graciella's eldest daughter was the first to file a missing person report for her mother, the distant personality. So, who was Romero, and why didn't Graciella's family warm up to him? She met him a while after her divorce. Cuauhtemoc Romero Sanchez was one of her beauty salon's clients. Initially, their interaction was based on friendship. Later, the man took the bold step of asking the beautiful and successful woman out. Mrs. Garcia accepted his invitation, and before she knew it, their relationship evolved into something more. When she introduced him to her family, they noted his excessive aloofness and cold demeanor. Annabelle and Gabby shared that they tried multiple times to connect with him, but Romero did not reciprocate. Graciella's children were puzzled by such behavior, but attributed it to individual personality differences, especially compared to their mother's past relationships. They genuinely wanted to understand her partner and the motives driving him. Sometimes he appeared odd and unsociable to them. They couldn't grasp how such a vibrant and joyous woman could fall for someone so dry. Nonetheless, they respected her choice. When their mother announced her upcoming marriage, everyone supported her and shared in the joy of the occasion, especially the girls, because they wanted to see her happy and loved. Romero's arrogance and restraint were noted even by guests on the wedding day. Some even thought he was overly jealous, as he monopolized the bride's attention. When Graciella's young grandchildren came to congratulate the newlyweds, Sanchez treated them with disdain rather than affection and tenderness. It was clear he didn't want to share his wife with anyone, even her family. After that, Graciella's relatives found it hard to conceal their true feelings about the man. Annabelle even openly stated she did not consider him a stepfather, let alone a father. All they wanted was to maintain normal relations, as seen in civilized families. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved in together into Graciella's house, along with her youngest son, Jacob. The teenager shared that shortly after, Romero began acting as if he were the sole owner. According to the boy, the honeymoon period was short-lived. Soon, the family idyll began to crumble. He noticed that his mother initially tried to set personal boundaries, but being non-confrontational, quickly gave in. This seemed to suit Romero, who was quick-tempered and never the first to apologize. To avoid creating tension in the family, Graciella conceded to him. Over time, it seemed she realized she had rushed into the marriage. In heart-to-heart conversations, she confessed feeling constrained and oppressed. Her husband controlled her and wouldn't let her go anywhere alone. Yet, she never spoke of wanting to leave the abusive relationship. It appeared Graciella was still in love with him. Everyone began to understand she had tied herself to the wrong man. Moreover, it seemed he was unemployed and living off his wife, as his constant presence at her side was otherwise inexplicable. This greatly frustrated the hard-working Garcia family. Sanchez was a skilled manipulator. He followed her everywhere, monitored her correspondences, and even friendships with her girlfriends were under threat of being disrupted. He either wouldn't let her go, or could unexpectedly show up as if testing Graciella's fidelity. His jealousy was excessive. The heroine became embarrassed by such behavior and ultimately limited her social circle. Her family became the only people she communicated with. This inevitably affected her professional life, as the industry demanded constant contact with clients and attendance at various events. Friends and colleagues noticed that her former cheerfulness had vanished. The always radiant woman now looked sad and worn. It was clear she was unhappy. Her children noticed changes in her mood and appearance. They also observed that she had lost her previous independence. After discussing it among themselves, they once again agreed that they didn't like Romero. However, he was an adult woman's choice, and there was little they could change, especially since they were accustomed to respecting Graciella's decisions. Other relatives also expressed distrust towards the man. At the same time, none of them knew how to help her. The couple's relationship needed professional help, and Gabby once mentioned this to her mother, to which she responded that she would manage her personal life on her own. The noose tightens. In 2018, Graciella announced her decision to relocate her beauty salon to her home, explaining it was more convenient for her. Her family was skeptical about this idea since they had never heard her mention such a plan in the 12 years since the salon's opening. Later, some clients mentioned that Romero often hung around the salon, creating a bit of tension, as if the warm and cozy atmosphere had been lost. Some thought Graciella made this move to solve a problem, but others doubted the idea originated from her, suspecting her jealous husband insisted on the move. Nonetheless, the salon owner continued to express her enthusiasm for the long-awaited changes, noting the home-based work allowed her to be close to Jacob and Romero. By the end of the year, she and her husband were remodeling a room for the salon, but the setup unexpectedly dragged on, completing only in May 2019. Despite the closure, her reputation remained intact, and a rumor of the studio's reopening attracted a queue of clients for months ahead, including new visitors. She was thrilled with her professional success, but became increasingly reticent about her personal life. Another incident raised concerns for her safety. Graciella asked Gabby if she could pick her up. When Gabby said it would take some time as she was far away, her mother insisted, an unusual plea for help that surprised Gabby. Graciella claimed everything was fine, attributing her request to a quarrel with her husband. After meeting, they spent time together, and Graciella appeared to relax, smiling and asking her daughter not to worry, suggesting, "Lovers' quarrels are but lovers' renewals." They parted ways, but Gabby remained uneasy, increasingly worried for her mother. Investigation. After Annabelle contacted the police, the relationship between Graciella's family and her husband deteriorated completely. He seemed angered by their decision to inform law enforcement. Romero presented an official version of his wife's disappearance, claiming she decided to take some time alone or had gone to another man and would soon show up. This was his response to anyone trying to clarify the situation. However, the police report did not go unnoticed. Officers launched an investigation, not ruling out that the missing woman could have been a victim of a crime. They first searched Graciella's home, where relatives confirmed only a few personal items were missing, with nothing else raising suspicion. The investigation included interviews with her children, husband, and others close to the family, including her ex-husband, but nothing substantial was learned. All unanimously expressed doubt about Romero's behavior, though he cooperated with detectives, consenting to a home search, participating in interrogations, providing his DNA, and undergoing a polygraph. With no grounds for his arrest, the investigation continued. Analysis of Graciella's phone records pinpointed the last signal near a bridge in Washington on November 9th at 12:30 p.m., after which the phone was turned off. Her bank accounts remained untouched, as did her social media. Hundreds of witnesses were questioned, and all places Graciella frequented were checked, to no avail. She seemed to have vanished without a trace, a disappearance the investigators deemed suspicious. About 4 months into the investigation, Hermiston police made a public statement, revealing no confirmed information about her last sighting. Despite Romero's failure to report her missing, there was no specific accusation against him. This stance by the authorities frustrated Graciella's relatives. Their communication with law enforcement dwindled. Previously updated weekly, contacts eventually ceased. The missing woman's children had to call the station themselves for case updates. Public engagement. As of March 2020, there were no advancements in the search for Graciella. The situation was further complicated by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Consequently, her family turned to the media, hoping to draw public attention to their ordeal and solicit assistance in gathering any information. They believed that even minor details could be significant. Gabby mainly communicated with the press, expressing her family's frustration over being in the dark for months and criticizing the police for it. She implored the investigators to devote more attention to finding her mother. The Garcia family suspected foul play in Graciella's disappearance, citing several indicators, particularly the condition of her belongings and the strange situation at home. It was unclear who would take such a drastic step against her, as she had no visible enemies. It was evident she couldn't have left on her own. She would have contacted her family to reassure them. Their lack of communication indicated something terrible had happened. In addition to media coverage, posters and flyers describing the missing 49-year-old Latina woman, approximately 1.6 meters tall and weighing around 62 kilograms, with dyed blonde hair, were distributed throughout the city. Suspect nearby? Graciella's children also requested a change in the detective team handling the case, suspecting bias and collusion with Romero. Somehow, these individuals were acquainted with each other. The family voiced concerns over numerous inconsistencies in the case. It was discovered that Sanchez's phone was turned off on the day of his wife's disappearance, and his behavior did not resemble that of a person alarmed by the sudden vanishing of a loved one. The Garcia family demanded the suspect's arrest. The police chief, Jason Edmiston, promptly responded to these accusations, confirming Mrs. Garcia's disappearance as suspicious and possibly involving foul play, although this was just one hypothesis. He assured the investigation remained impartial, guided by evidence and circumstances, and dismissed any allegations of social connections between Romero and law enforcement as unfounded. Edmiston also mentioned the spread of misinformation hindering the investigation and described the case as ongoing and developing, with certain information necessarily kept confidential. Additionally, authorities sought assistance from the FBI. Edmiston expressed frustration over public criticism of the police's actions without understanding the legal complexities. Meanwhile, Gabby announced a fundraiser to hire a private detective, a move perceived as a critique of the police's handling of the investigation, suggesting their inefficacy. On the first anniversary of Graciella's disappearance, her family organized a memorial event attended by friends and acquaintances, reminiscing about her vibrant and cheerful nature. They prayed for her safe return and lit candles, later placing signs outside the police station urging the search for Graciella Garcia to continue. The latest update in the case came in September 2023, when a significant incident involving Romero Sanchez made headlines. He was attacked and severely injured, requiring surgery. Speculation suggested that Graciella's brother, Mason Garcia, had shot the missing woman's husband multiple times. However, the media did not disclose the event's specifics or any legal repercussions for Mason. It seemed Graciella's family had grown tired of the police's apparent inaction toward Sanchez, leading one of them to take matters into their own hands, potentially leading to a more frightening conclusion. A tragic conclusion. Currently, the disappearance of Graciella Garcia remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family in agonizing uncertainty. This state of not knowing is profoundly detrimental to their health and mental well-being. Over time, one might come to terms with loss, but the difficulty of living in limbo is significantly harder. It remains unknown whether Graciella is alive. Her children are left with nothing but to pray that the situation will soon become clear and that those responsible will face justice. Ultimately, no crime is perfect. Sometimes there's just a lack of motive and evidence.